At exactly 4:50 in the morning, my banking application flashed a single red warning line that made my blood run absolutely cold. Access denied. My $950,000 trust fund was frozen overnight. I called my father, and he said softly that they had to step in because family comes first. I did not argue. I put on my blazer, drove to the bank, and set my identification on the manager's desk. The manager clicked his mouse once, turned the monitor toward me, and asked who signed this power of attorney 4 days ago. Then he pulled up the digital tracking data, and the room went completely silent. My name is Sarah Bennett. I am 31 years old, and I work as a corporate bookkeeper for a mid-sized logistics firm in downtown Chicago. For my entire life, I have been the invisible safety net for my family. Whenever the mortgage was inexplicably late, whenever the credit cards were maxed out, I was the one who quietly balanced their books and made the emergency transfers. I gave, and they took. My father, Robert, a former insurance broker with a severe and highly destructive gambling habit, always reserved his praise for my older sister, Jessica. Jessica was the undisputed golden child of the Bennett family. She was the one who got the lavish $70,000 wedding, the massive down payment for her suburban home, and endless praise when she married Travis, a flashy real estate developer who wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent. I never asked for a parade. I just wanted my family to be stable. But my grandmother, before she passed away, saw the bitter truth of our family dynamic. She bypassed my father entirely and left me a $950,000 trust fund meant to secure my future. She told me on her deathbed that my father would drain me completely dry if I let him, and she begged me to protect myself. I thought the strict security protocols of a major banking institution would be enough to keep my future safe. I was incredibly, dangerously wrong. The nightmare began on a quiet Tuesday morning. The air in my apartment was still and cool. At exactly 4:50 in the morning, my phone emitted a sharp, piercing chime. It was the highly specific, high-priority tone I had programmed exclusively for emergency banking alerts. As a corporate bookkeeper, I live my life by the numbers, and I never ignore a financial notification. I rolled over, rubbing the heavy sleep from my eyes, and grabbed the phone from my nightstand. The screen brightness stung my eyes in the dark room, but the notification banner was horrifyingly clear. It was a severe fraud alert from my primary financial institution. I sat up instantly, my heart suddenly beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tapped the notification, and the secure banking application loaded. I held my breath while the blue circle spun on the screen, waiting for my account dashboards to populate with my checking, savings, and trust balances. But they did not populate. Instead, the screen went completely gray. A solid red banner appeared at the very top of the display. In bold, unforgiving letters, it read, "Access denied. Account frozen pending authorization." Directly below that terrifying red banner was a summary of my most recent activity. A pending outbound wire transfer was sitting there, queued up and waiting to clear the moment the business day officially opened. The amount requested was for $950,000. My lungs entirely forgot how to function. That was every single penny of my trust fund. It was the entire financial safety net my grandmother had painstakingly built and left exclusively for me. The money was not just sitting in an easily accessible checking account. It was locked in a secure, restricted trust that required specific legal authorizations to move. Yet here it was queued up to vanish into the banking ether. I stared at the glowing screen until my vision blurred. $950,000. Gone. I tried to refresh the application. I closed it entirely and opened it again, praying it was a system error. The red banner remained, access denied. The numbers were still there, taunting me, frozen in digital transition. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead and down the back of my neck. My hands began to shake so violently that I nearly dropped the phone onto the hardwood floor. This was not a glitch. This was not a banking error. This was a targeted, deliberate, and highly calculated action. Someone had bypassed the heavy security protocols on an ironclad trust fund. I did not pause to think. I just reacted with pure adrenaline. I opened my phone application, scrolled to my recent contacts, and pressed the name labeled Dad, my father. The phone rang once, twice. He answered on the third ring, and his voice was not groggy or thick with early morning sleep. He sounded entirely awake, disturbingly calm, as if he had been sitting by the phone fully dressed, waiting for this exact confrontation. "Dad," I breathed, forcing the words through a throat that felt like it was swelling shut. "My trust fund is frozen. Someone is trying to wire the money out right now." There was a pause on the line. It was not a pause of shock, confusion, or parental concern. It was the calculated, heavy silence of a man who had been caught exactly where he intended to be. "I know, Sarah," he said softly. His tone was perfectly level-coated in that same patronizing artificial warmth he always used when he was about to tell me why my feelings or my boundaries did not matter. Travis had a massive cash flow issue with his new luxury development project. We had to step in. Family first. Do not make a big deal out of this, Sarah. We will put the money back when the project pays out. I sat perfectly still on the edge of my bed, the phone pressed hard against my ear. Travis, my sister Jessica's husband. The man who drove leased luxury cars to look wealthy while perpetually asking my father for business advice. And my father had just openly admitted to moving nearly $1 million of my legally protected money to bail out his golden son-in-law. Family first. Those two words echoed in the absolute quiet of my bedroom. Family first had always been my father's ultimate weapon, his favorite excuse for taking every ounce of energy and money I had to give and handing it directly to my sister. I did not argue with him. I did not scream into the receiver. I did not demand to know how he managed to bypass the bank's intense security measures. As a professional bookkeeper, I knew that arguing with a thief, while the money was still sitting in a pending transit status, was a complete waste of precious time. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the end call button. I stood up from the bed. The suffocating panic that had been gripping my chest evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, sharp, mechanical clarity. I walked straight to my closet. I put on my most professional navy blue blazer, a crisp white button-down shirt, and dark tailored trousers. I brushed my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I grabbed my leather portfolio, my car keys, and my state-issued driver's license. I drove through the empty, pre-dawn streets of Chicago. The streetlights reflected off the damp morning pavement, casting long, fractured shadows across my windshield. As I gripped the steering wheel, my mind raced back to my grandmother. She was a shrewd, no-nonsense woman who had worked her entire life to build a small real estate fortune. Before she died, she pulled me aside and explicitly told me she was cutting my father out of her will. She knew Robert. She knew he was a financial risk addict, a man who desperately chased gambling highs and shady high-yield investments under the guise of being a legitimate entrepreneur. She knew with absolute certainty that if he ever had access to her money, he would drain it dry and leave me with nothing but his debts. So she established the trust exclusively for me, wrapping it in what we both believed was impenetrable banking security. She did it to protect me from him, and now he had somehow broken through the walls she built. I pulled into the parking lot of my bank branch at exactly 7:30 in the morning. The heavy glass double doors were locked tight. The interior lights were only operating at half capacity. I sat in my car staring relentlessly at the entrance, watching the digital minutes tick by on my dashboard clock. 7:40, 7:50. The anticipation tasted like copper in my mouth. At exactly 8 o'clock, a uniformed security guard walked to the front doors, turned the deadbolt, and pushed them open. I was out of my car and stepping through those doors before the guard had even walked back to his post. I completely bypassed the morning teller line and walked straight back to the private glass office of the branch manager, a man named Mr. Davis, whom I had dealt with professionally for several years. He looked up from his morning paperwork, startled by my sudden and intense appearance. "Good morning, Sarah." He began his practiced customer service smile, instantly faltering when he registered the severe expression on my face. "Is everything all right today?" I walked directly to his desk and slid my driver's license across the polished wood. "Someone initiated a wire transfer from my secure trust fund early this morning," I said, keeping my voice dead level, stripped of all panic and emotion. "I need you to stop that transfer immediately. Flag the entire account for severe fraudulent activity." Mr. Davis blinked hard, the massive gravity of the situation hitting him instantly. He picked up my license, verified my identity against his computer screen, and began typing frantically on his keyboard. His brow furrowed deeply as my account details loaded onto his display. The silence in the small glass office, stretched tight, broken only by the rapid, anxious clacking of the keyboard. "Sarah," he said, his voice dropping a full octave into a hushed, nervous tone. "This transfer was not a hack. It was initiated in person by your father, Robert Bennett. He submitted a full legally binding power of attorney to the bank's legal department. It was electronically signed by you 4 days ago. It gives him total unrestricted authorization to move funds on your behalf." He reached out and turned his large flat-screen monitor toward me. There it was, a pristine, incredibly official-looking legal document. It was stamped heavily by a licensed notary public. At the very bottom of the page, resting perfectly on the signature line, was a digital rendering of my signature. It looked remarkably, terrifyingly accurate. The loops, the slant, the specific pressure points, it was all perfectly matched to how I sign my name on corporate ledgers every single day. I stared at the screen, analyzing the document with the trained eye of an auditor. "I did not sign this document," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the heavy weight of absolute unshakable certainty. "This is a complete forgery." Mr. Davis visibly paled. The blood completely drained from his face as he realized his bank was currently processing a massive fraudulent transaction under his direct watch. "If this is a forgery, it is a highly sophisticated, legally binding one," he stammered defensively. "We verified the state notary seal. We verified the digital certificate attached to the electronic signature. It passed all of our standard security protocols." I leaned over the desk, my eyes locked tightly on the digital document on his screen. "Nothing is foolproof, Mr. Davis. I am a corporate bookkeeper. I audit digital financial trails for a living. I need you to pull up the back-end metadata attached to that signature block right now. Show me the exact IP address and the digital timestamp of where and when this document was executed." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he clicked out of the main viewing window and navigated through the secure banking verification portal. He opened the back-end security logs for the document software. Rows of dense technical data filled the screen. He scanned the lines, then highlighted a specific string of text. "Here," he said, pointing a shaking finger at the monitor. "The digital signature was captured and locked on Friday afternoon at exactly 2:15. The IP address is registered to a commercial broadband provider." He highlighted the IP address, copied it, and ran it through a basic location tracking system on his browser. A map populated on the screen, dropping a bright red pin directly onto a commercial office building in the West Loop district. I recognized the address immediately. It was the exact street address of Travis's real estate development firm. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the air conditioning vent above us. The massive, crushing reality of the betrayal settled over me like a heavy blanket. My father had not just asked me for a difficult favor. He had not just pressured me to financially support the family. He had actively, deliberately conspired with my brother-in-law to forge legal documents, bypass banking security, and steal my entire inheritance. They had sat comfortably in that flashy West Loop office, generated a fake power of attorney, and perfectly copied my signature while I was sitting at my own desk across town, faithfully balancing someone else's books. "Cancel the wire," I told Mr. Davis, my voice suddenly sharp enough to cut glass. "Cancel it right now. Lock the entire account down so that not even I can move a single dollar without walking into this exact branch and providing a physical thumbprint. Print out every single page of that metadata, the notary stamp, and the forged document. I need hard copies of everything." He nodded quickly, his fingers flying across the keyboard to execute the immediate stop payment order. I stood there, watching the office printer hum to life, spitting out the physical proof of my family's treachery page by page. They thought they could take everything from me because I had always been the quiet one, the responsible one, the invisible daughter who never fought back. They thought they had brilliantly outsmarted me, but they were about to learn that you never hand a forged financial document to a corporate bookkeeper. I sat in my car in this bank parking lot. The morning sun was just starting to reflect off the glass buildings of downtown Chicago. My hands rested on the steering wheel. They were completely steady. That is the thing about shock. Sometimes it does not make you scream. Sometimes it just turns off all the noise in your brain and leaves you with absolute silence. I looked at the printed papers sitting on my passenger seat. The forged power of attorney. The digital stamp from Travis and his cousin. my signature flawlessly copied. I picked up my phone and dialed my father. The line rang twice. I expected him to sound guilty. I expected him to sound panicked or at least caught off guard. When he answered, his voice was entirely smooth. It was the voice of a man who believed he had done absolutely nothing wrong. "Good morning, Sarah," he said. I did not return the greeting. "Dad?" I said, my voice flat. "My trust fund is frozen. The bank manager just showed me a power of attorney that I never signed. Someone is trying to wire $950,000 out of my account." There was a brief pause. It was not a pause of surprise. It was a pause of calculation. "I know Sarah," he replied. His tone was gentle, patronizing, and sickeningly calm. Travis had a massive cash flow issue with his new development project. The contractors were threatening to walk away. We had to step in. Family first. Do not make a big deal out of this. Family first. Those two words echoed in the quiet cabin of my car. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "You forged my signature," I said. "You walked into my bank and submitted a fake legal document to drain my entire inheritance." "We did not drain it," he sighed, sounding almost annoyed that I was being so difficult. "We simply reallocated it for a higher purpose. Travis is building a legacy for this family. You are a single woman with a modest lifestyle. You do not need nearly $1 million just sitting there doing nothing. We are putting the money to work. When the project pays out, you will get your share. Now stop being dramatic and let us handle the business." He hung up. He actually hung up on me. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask if I needed that money. He simply decided that my future was acceptable collateral for his golden son-in-law. I placed the phone down. I took one deep breath. Then I put my car in drive and headed straight for the suburbs. The drive from downtown Chicago to my parents' house took 45 minutes. During that time, I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence, letting the reality of my life wash over me. For 31 years, I had been the reliable background character in the Bennett family production. I was the corporate bookkeeper who fixed their tax errors. I was the one who quietly paid the utility bills when my father gambled away his commission checks. I was the one who bought groceries when Travis and Jessica were saving up for their luxury honeymoon. I gave and gave until I was hollow. And what was my reward? My own father had orchestrated a federal crime to rob me blind. They viewed my grandmother leaving me that trust as an insult to their hierarchy. In their minds, the money belonged to Jessica and Travis by right. I was just the unauthorized vault holding their cash. I pulled into their pristine driveway. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The exterior of the house was painted a flawless stark white. Parked right in the center of the driveway was Travis and his ridiculous leased luxury SUV. I parked my modest sedan on the street just as my mother always demanded, so I would not ruin the aesthetic of the property. I walked up the brick pathway. I did not knock. I turned the handle and pushed the front door open. The sound of popping corks and loud laughter drifted from the living room. I walked down the hallway, the thick carpet absorbing the sound of my footsteps. I stepped into the archway of the living room and simply stood there watching the scene unfold. The morning light poured through the large bay windows, illuminating a celebration built entirely on my stolen future. My father was leaning against the fireplace holding a crystal champagne flute. My mother, Helen, was sitting on the expensive velvet sofa, her face glowing with pride. Jessica was standing next to her husband, Travis. Travis was wearing a tailored suit, holding a bottle of expensive champagne and pouring a generous amount into Jessica's glass. To the new luxury condos, Travis cheered, raising his glass high. To the Bennett and Hayes legacy. My father raised his glass in agreement. To family, he said. They all drank. Not a single ounce of guilt on any of their faces. Not a single shadow of regret. They were drinking champagne, purchased with my stolen trust fund. Jessica turned and finally noticed me standing in the archway. She did not look ashamed. Her face lit up with a brilliant, mocking smile. "Oh, Sarah," she said, waving her glass at me. "Good you are here. We were just celebrating." Travis finally secured the bridge capital for the West Loop project. He completely saved the development. She walked over to me, her expensive perfume filling the air. "You should really see the blueprints, Sarah," she boasted. "It is going to be magnificent. Travis says the returns will be so high, we can finally pull the trigger on our mansion upgrade. We are looking at a beautiful property in the North Shore. 7 bedrooms, wine cellar, the works. Real success looks so good on us, do you not think? I looked at my sister, the golden child who had never worked a hard day in her entire life. She was bragging about a mansion upgrade funded by a criminal act committed against her own blood. Travis walked over, sliding his arm around Jessica's waist. He looked at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Thanks for being a team player, Sarah," he said smoothly. "I know it was a surprise, but we really needed that capital. You know how real estate is? Cash is king. We will make sure you get a nice little return on your investment when the units sell. Consider yourself a silent partner." I stared at him. A silent partner. That was their plan. Rob me blind and then slap a corporate title on the theft to make it sound acceptable. My mother Helen set her mimosa down on the glass coffee table and let out a long, dramatic sigh. She looked at me with an expression of deep disappointment, as if I were the one ruining a perfectly good morning. "Sarah, wipe that scowl off your face," she said sharply. "You have been an accountant for years, and you still cannot compare to Travis closing a major project. What do you even do all day? Just push numbers around on a screen? That money from your grandmother was completely wasted sitting in your conservative little bank account. Your father is using it as working capital to actually build something meaningful." She stood up and smoothed her expensive silk blouse. "You are 31 years old, Sarah," she continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "You live in a tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old car. You have no vision. Travis and Jessica are the future of this family. They need resources to expand their network and maintain their lifestyle. You should be proud to contribute. Do not be selfish. Do not be selfish." The words hung in the air, suspended in the sunlit room. I looked at the four of them. I looked at the empty champagne bottle. I looked at my father, who was avoiding my gaze and staring into his glass. I looked at my mother, whose face was a mask of righteous entitlement. I looked at Jessica and Travis, completely oblivious to the legal firestorm they had just ignited. For years, I had believed they were just flawed people who struggled with money. For years, I had made excuses for their terrible financial decisions. I thought if I just loved them enough, if I just helped them enough, they would eventually see my value. I thought they were just borrowing my energy. But in that exact moment, standing in that lavish living room, I finally understood the absolute truth. They did not borrow. They robbed. They were not a family struggling to get by. They were a cartel of emotional and financial vampires. They had forged a legal document. They had impersonated me. They had attempted to steal $950,000 without a single second of hesitation. And if they got away with it, they would sleep perfectly well at night while I was left with nothing. A normal person might have screamed. A normal person might have thrown the crystal glasses against the brick fireplace and demanded their money back. A normal person might have broken down sobbing, asking why they were so fundamentally unloved. But I was not a normal person anymore. The daughter they knew, the quiet, compliant bookkeeper, died right there in that living room. What took her place was something entirely different. Something cold, calculating, and completely devoid of mercy. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I let a slow, measured smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile you give a client when you have just found the fatal error in their tax return, and you know they are going down. "You know what I said?" My voice incredibly calm and pleasant. "You're absolutely right, Mom. I do not have the kind of vision Travis has. I just push numbers around on a screen. I suppose I should be grateful to be a part of such an ambitious family project." My mother visibly relaxed her shoulders, dropping as she smiled back at me. "Well, I am glad you are finally seeing reasons, Sarah. We knew you would understand once you saw the big picture." Jessica clapped her hands together. "See, I told you guys she would be fine with it. Sarah is always fine with everything. Come have a glass of champagne with us. Let us toast to the new mansion." I shook my head politely. "No, thank you," I said. "I actually have to get back to the office. I just wanted to come by and hear the news directly from all of you. I just needed to understand exactly what happened." Travis laughed, a loud, booming sound. "Business never sleeps, right, Sarah? Keep pushing those numbers. We will send you an invitation to the launch party. You can see your investment at work. I will definitely be there," I replied. My smile never wavered. "Excuse me for a moment. I just need to use the restroom to wash my hands before I head back into the city." "Of course, dear," my mother said, already turning her attention back to Travis and Jessica. "The guest bathroom is spotless. I had the cleaners in yesterday. I walked down the hallway, leaving the sounds of their celebration behind me. I stepped into the guest bathroom and locked the heavy wooden door. The silence in the small tiled room was immediate. I walked over to the porcelain sink and turned on the cold water. I let it run over my wrists, grounding myself in the physical sensation. I looked up at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My eyes were dark and steady. My posture was perfectly straight. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated the system and forced me into submission. They truly believed that because I was quiet, I was stupid, but they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed I was just a simple corporate bookkeeper. They forgot that bookkeepers are the ones who know exactly how to follow the money. We are the ones who know how to document the fraud. We are the ones who know how to build a paper trail so solid that no defense attorney in the country can break it. They wanted to play a high-stakes game with my future. They wanted to steal my inheritance and call it family capital. They wanted to use my flawless credit and my clean name to wash their dirty debts. I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands methodically on a pristine linen towel. I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket and opened my secure email application. I typed out a quick message to a forensic accountant I had worked with during a corporate audit 3 years ago. Then I drafted a second message to a fraud litigation attorney whose contact information I kept exactly for high-risk situations. I hit send on both emails. I am going to burn this entire family to the ground, I whispered to my reflection. And I am going to do it purely with numbers. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked back down the hallway. I waved goodbye to my parents and my sister as they continued to drink champagne in the morning sun. I walked out the front door down the brick path and got into my car. I put the vehicle in drive and pulled away from the curb. I did not look back at the house. I had a job to do. It was time to start planning the exact method of their destruction. I drove back to my small apartment in the city, but I did not let my anger consume me. Anger is a wildfire. It burns bright and fast, but it leaves you with nothing but ashes. I needed to be a slow-burning ember. I needed to be ice. For my entire life, I had been the compliant and invisible daughter who absorbed their financial disasters and kept my mouth shut. If I suddenly turned into a roaring warrior, they would put up their defenses. So the very next morning, I picked up my phone and did the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I called my father and apologized for my reaction. I told him I was just shocked by the suddenness of the wire transfer. I told him I understood that Travis needed the capital for the family legacy. I forced my voice to sound small and agreeable, exactly the way he liked it. He chuckled a deep and relieved sound and told me he knew I would eventually see reason. He told me I was a good girl. I hung up the phone and felt physically sick. But the trap was set. They thought I had folded. They thought they had won. They went back to their lavish lunches and their luxury condo blueprints, completely unaware that I was already tearing down the foundation of their lives. I did not waste a single second. I took 2 days of personal leave from my logistics firm. I walked into the sleek high-rise office of a formidable fraud litigation attorney named David Sterling. David was not a man who played games. He looked at the printed metadata from my bank, the copy of the forged power of attorney, and the IP address trace. He did not give me false hope, but he gave me something better. He gave me a strategy. Through David, I hired a private forensic accountant named Thomas Bradley. Thomas was a former federal auditor who specialized in unraveling complex corporate embezzlement schemes. I gave him everything I had. I gave him Travis's business tax identification numbers, the real estate company public filing records, and the exact routing details of my stolen trust fund. I told Thomas to follow the money. I needed to know exactly where my grandmother's $950,000 had gone down to the very last cent. For 4 agonizing days, I went to work as usual. I balanced corporate ledgers. I smiled at my coworkers. I ate my lunch in the break room. And every evening I sat in my quiet apartment staring at the wall, waiting for Thomas to call. When the call finally came, I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking black coffee. Thomas asked me to come to his office immediately. The tone of his voice sent a cold shiver down my spine. When I arrived, he had several thick folders spread across his large oak desk. "Sarah," he said, looking at me with a mixture of professional detachment and genuine pity, "your father and your brother-in-law are not just careless, they are desperate." Thomas opened the first folder and turned a document toward me. It was a massive spreadsheet mapping the flow of the stolen funds. Travis did not put $950,000 into a new luxury condo project. The development did not even have the proper municipal zoning permits yet. But that was not the worst part. "Look at this distribution," Thomas said, tapping a red line on the paper. The second the wire transfer hit Travis's business account, it was immediately fractured. Travis only kept $650,000. The remaining $300,000 was instantly wired back out to a secondary account controlled exclusively by your father, Robert Bennett. I stared at the numbers. My father had explicitly told me he was moving the money to help Travis. Why did he take a $300,000 cut? Thomas opened the second folder. "Your father has been hiding a massive secret from your family," he explained quietly. 3 years ago, the Internal Revenue Service placed severe tax liens on your father's personal and business assets. He had been grossly underreporting his income and claiming fraudulent deductions to fund his gambling habits. The IRS was literally weeks away from seizing his house and freezing his pension. He took $300,000 of your trust fund and wired it directly to the United States Treasury to save himself from federal tax evasion charges. My breath caught in my throat. My father had not just bailed out his golden son-in-law, he had robbed me to keep himself out of a federal penitentiary. He had stolen my grandmother's gift to cover up years of his own criminal negligence. And there is one more thing, Thomas added, pushing a third piece of paper across the desk. It was a background check on the notary public whose official stamp was pressed onto the forged power of attorney. The man's name was William Hayes. I stared at the name. Hayes, that was Travis's last name. William Hayes is Travis's first cousin, Thomas said, confirming my darkest suspicion. He lost his real estate license 2 years ago for unethical practices, but he managed to keep his notary commission. They did not just find a random corrupt official. They kept the forgery entirely within the family. It is a closed-loop conspiracy. I sat in the leather chair of that accounting office, feeling the sheer weight of their betrayal pressing down on my chest. They had sat in a room together, my father, my brother-in-law, and his cousin. They had looked at my signature. They had stamped a fraudulent document. They had knowingly, willingly, and systematically dismantled my financial future to save themselves. They did not see me as a daughter or a sister-in-law. They saw me as a piggy bank that they were entitled to smash open. I thanked Thomas, gathered the copies of the evidence, and drove home. I knew I had to be careful. I knew I had to wait for David to prepare the legal filings. But the universe has a funny way of accelerating timelines. The very next morning, the bank initiated their official fraud investigation. My visit to the branch manager had triggered an automated internal review, and the sheer size of the transfer had flagged the account at the corporate level. The bank security division formally summoned my father to their downtown headquarters to verify the authenticity of the power of attorney. The panic was immediate. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my office phone rang. The receptionist told me my father was waiting for me in the lobby. He did not ask if I was busy. He demanded that I come down. I walked into the glass-walled lobby and found Robert pacing relentlessly near the reception desk. He was sweating heavily. The confident, patronizing man who had toasted to his own success just days ago was gone. In his place was a terrified, desperate animal caught in a trap of his own making. "Sarah," he said, grabbing my upper arm and pulling me toward a quiet corner of the lobby. His grip was entirely too tight. It hurt, but I did not pull away. I needed to see exactly how far he would go. "The bank is causing problems," he hissed, glancing around nervously to make sure none of my coworkers were listening. "They are launching a formal fraud inquiry into the wire transfer. They want me to come in and answer questions about the power of attorney." I kept my face perfectly blank. "Why would they do that?" I asked innocently. "Because they are bureaucratic idiots," he snapped, his temper flaring. "But it does not matter. We can fix this right now." I brought the paperwork. He unzipped his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He shoved it into my hands along with a black ink pen. I looked down at the document. It was a typed consent and ratification form. The legal language was dense, but the core message was crystal clear. By signing it, I would be legally declaring that I had given Robert Bennett full verbal and written authorization to execute the power of attorney and move the $950,000. Even worse, the document was backdated to last week, specifically 2 days before the fraudulent wire transfer took place. Sign it, he demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh, threatening whisper. Sign it right now, Sarah. I will take it to the bank and this whole investigation will disappear. I looked at the paper. Then I looked up at the man who had raised me. You want me to sign a backdated legal document? I asked quietly. That is perjury, Dad. Do not give me your accounting lectures. He spat, his face turning a dark mottled red. I am your father. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. I fed you. I clothed you. You owe me this. If the bank escalates this investigation, they could involve the authorities. I could be looking at prison time, Sarah. Do you want your own father to go to prison? Do you want to kill your mother with the stress of a trial? He was using every weapon in his arsenal. Guilt, obligation, the sacred concept of family loyalty. He was trying to crush me under the weight of his own crimes. Travis is depending on us. Robert continued leaning closer until I could smell the stale coffee and panic on his breath. Jessica is depending on us. This family is building a future, and you are going to ruin it because you want to be stubborn over some bank technicality. Sign the damn paper, Sarah. You are a Bennett. Act like one. I stared at the black pen in his hand. If I signed that paper with my real signature, I would be legally validating their theft. I would be signing away my grandmother's gift forever. I would be making myself a willing accomplice in their conspiracy. I looked at his desperate, sweating face. I saw the pure, unadulterated selfishness burning in his eyes. He did not love me. He never had. I was just a tool to him, a shield to throw between himself and the consequences of his actions. He was fully prepared to let me take the fall for his massive financial crimes. The sheer audacity of his request clarified everything for me. There was no more lingering doubt. There was no tiny inner child hoping my father would suddenly realize his mistakes and apologize. He was not going to change. He was only going to destroy me if I let him. I reached out and took the black pen from his trembling hand. The cool metal felt heavy against my fingers. For a fraction of a second, my father let out a long breath of relief. He actually thought I was going to submit to his demands. He truly believed that his years of psychological conditioning had worked perfectly. He thought I was still the obedient little girl who would sacrifice her own safety to keep the peace in the family. But I was not thinking about peace. I was thinking about the forensic accountant report sitting on my kitchen table. I was thinking about the $300,000 wired to the Internal Revenue Service to pay for his gambling debts. I was thinking about Travis and his corrupt cousin sitting in that West Loop office flawlessly forging my name. I looked down at the signature line on the consent and ratification form. I needed to escape this lobby without causing a massive scene that could jeopardize my employment. I needed to get my father out of my workplace immediately. Most importantly, I needed to make him believe he was safe so he would not try to move the rest of the stolen funds into offshore accounts before the authorities could freeze them. I uncapped the pen. I placed the tip against the crisp white paper. I did not hesitate. I wrote out a signature, but I did not write my own. I deliberately altered the slant of the letters. I misspelled my own middle name, changing Marie to Marie. I completely changed the final loop of my last name, drawing a sharp, rigid line instead of my usual flowing curve. It was a signature that any basic handwriting expert would instantly flag as invalid. It carried absolutely zero legal weight, but to a panicked, desperate man standing in a poorly lit corporate lobby, it looked convincing enough. I handed the paper back to him, along with the pen. Here, I said, my voice soft and perfectly controlled. Take it to the bank, Dad. I hope this fixes everything for you. He snatched the paper from my hands, his eyes scanning the bottom line with greedy relief. He did not notice the misspelled middle name. He did not notice the altered loops. He only saw his get-out-of-jail-free card. You did the right thing, Sarah, he said, his voice returning to that sickeningly warm and patronizing tone. I knew we could count on you. Family protects family. I will call your mother and tell her the good news. We will have you over for a proper dinner soon to celebrate. He turned and walked out of the glass lobby doors, his posture suddenly straight and confident again. He clutched his leather briefcase tightly, completely unaware that he was carrying a worthless piece of paper. He thought he had outsmarted the system. He thought he had secured his stolen wealth. I stood in the lobby and watched him walk across the parking lot until he disappeared into his car. I did not feel any guilt. I did not feel any sorrow. I turned around and walked back to the elevators, ready to return to my desk and continue building the ironclad case that would finally put my father and my brother-in-law exactly where they belonged. The investigation was officially open, and there was no stopping the avalanche that was about to hit them. 2 days after my father cornered me in the lobby of my office building, the illusion of our family peace was tested once again. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. The caller identification displayed my mother, Helen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, carefully controlling my breathing so my voice would sound exactly as meek and compliant as she expected. She did not ask how my day was going. She did not ask how I was feeling after the sudden loss of my trust fund. She simply told me that she was making a pot roast and that I needed to come over for a family dinner that evening. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. I knew exactly what this was. The scribbled consent form I had handed my father in the lobby was a temporary bandage on a gaping legal wound. I knew the bank fraud department would not accept a flimsy, unnotarized piece of paper to clear a highly suspicious transfer of $950,000. The financial institutions have rigid protocols. My father and Travis were beginning to realize that stealing nearly $1 million required more than just one forged signature. They needed my active, continuous cooperation to cover their tracks. They needed me to sit at their table and be molded into the perfect silent accomplice. I drove out to the suburbs as the sun began to set, casting long dark shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of my parents' neighborhood. When I parked on the street, carefully avoiding the prime driveway spot reserved for Travis and his luxury vehicle, I sat in my car for a long moment. I looked at the house where I had grown up. From the outside, it looked like the ultimate American dream. White siding, perfect shutters, a welcoming front porch. But I knew the foundation was rotting. I took a deep breath, stepped out of my car, and walked to the front door. The moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me like a physical weight. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat and heavy tension. My mother, Helen, greeted me in the foyer with a tight, brittle smile. She pulled me into a hug that felt more like a cage than a greeting. Her perfume was overwhelming. "Sarah," she said, her voice pitched unusually high, "I am so glad you're here. We just needed our family together tonight." I walked into the dining room. The table was set with the good china and crystal wine glasses. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the table staring into a glass of scotch. He looked up when I entered, but he did not speak. His eyes were bloodshot and his skin had a grayish tint. Across from him sat my sister, Jessica, and her husband, Travis. Jessica was wearing a designer silk top, scrolling aggressively on her phone. Travis was leaning back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the mahogany table in a rapid, anxious rhythm. Nobody looked happy to see me. They looked like cornered animals waiting for the cage to open. We sat down to eat. The conversation was incredibly strained. My mother nervously filled the silence with empty chatter about the neighborhood homeowners association and the weather. Jessica complained about the caterer she had hired for an upcoming gala. Travis chewed his food aggressively, keeping his eyes fixed on his plate. I ate quietly, playing the role of the invisible daughter. I did not ask questions. I let them guide the performance. I knew the pleasantries would not last long. As soon as the dinner plates were cleared, the charade abruptly ended. My mother did not bring out dessert. Instead, she reached for her wine glass, took a large gulp, and let out a trembling sigh. She looked at me from across the table, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. They were not tears of genuine sorrow. They were the highly weaponized tears she had used to manipulate my father and me for my entire life. "Sarah," she began, her voice quivering with dramatic fragility, "we are in a very difficult position. Your father went to the bank today. The form you signed in your lobby was not enough for their fraud department. They are being completely unreasonable." She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold, and her grip was shockingly strong. "They are launching a full investigation, Sarah. They are talking about freezing your father's accounts. They are talking about involving federal authorities." I kept my face perfectly neutral. I looked at my father. He was staring down at his empty scotch glass, refusing to meet my eyes. "If your father goes to jail, Mom will die," Helen sobbed, her voice rising in pitch. "The stress of a criminal trial will literally kill me, Sarah. My heart cannot take it. We are your family. We raised you. We provided for you. You cannot let them do this to us over a simple misunderstanding." I watched the tears roll down her cheeks. For 28 years, those tears had controlled my every action. Whenever Jessica bullied me and I fought back, Helen would cry about how my anger was tearing the family apart. Whenever my father gambled away the mortgage money, Helen would cry and beg me to use my meager savings to save the house. Her tears were the currency she used to buy my compliance. But sitting at that table, I felt absolutely nothing. The psychological chains she had wrapped around my mind had snapped the moment I saw that forged power of attorney. I pulled my hand away from hers, gently but firmly. "What do you need me to do, Mom?" I asked, keeping my tone soft and accommodating. Travis did not give her a chance to answer. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. The charming, arrogant facade he usually wore was completely gone. He looked desperate and angry. "The bank needs a formal notarized affidavit," Travis said sharply. "They need a sworn legal statement directly from you stating that you fully authorized Robert to move the trust fund into my business account. They need you to explicitly state that the electronic signature was valid and that no fraud occurred. I have the document right here. My cousin William is on standby to notarize it tonight." Travis reached into his expensive leather briefcase resting on the floor and pulled out a thick stack of papers. But he did not just pull out the affidavit. He placed a second heavy document directly in front of me. I looked down at the paperwork. The first document was exactly what he described. A sworn affidavit designed to clear them of all criminal liability and officially sign away my $950,000 inheritance. But the second document was something entirely different. The bold letters at the top of the page read, "Commercial Bridge Loan Guarantee Agreement." "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the second stack of papers. Travis let out an exasperated breath, running a hand through his expensive haircut. "Because of your bank dragging their feet, the trust funds are completely locked in a holding account. My development project is experiencing massive cash flow bottlenecks. The contractors are threatening to walk off the job site tomorrow morning if they are not paid. I need liquid capital immediately to keep the project alive until the bank clears the wire transfer." He tapped his finger hard against the loan agreement. "I took out a short-term commercial bridge loan for $200,000 to cover the immediate expenses. But because my business assets are tied up in the new property, the lender requires a secondary guarantor with an immaculate credit history." He looked me dead in the eye. "You have a perfect credit score, Sarah. No debt, consistent income, a spotless financial record. I need you to co-sign this loan." The sheer magnitude of their audacity left me temporarily breathless. They had not invited me to dinner to simply beg for forgiveness or ask me to cover up their crime. They had invited me here to strap me with an additional $200,000 of high-interest debt. They had stolen my entire future, and now they wanted to chain me to their sinking ship to keep themselves afloat for just a few more weeks. "Travis, you want me to take on a $200,000 loan?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble slightly to simulate fear. Jessica slammed her wineglass down on the table. "Oh my God, Sarah, stop being so dramatic." She snapped, her face twisting with irritation. "It is just a signature. Travis is going to pay it back as soon as your stubborn bank releases the trust money. You're just an accountant. You do not understand how high-level finance works. Travis is building an empire, and you are crying over a temporary bridge loan. You're so unbelievably selfish." I looked at my sister. She was wearing a diamond necklace purchased with money my father had likely stolen. She was calling me selfish for questioning a loan that could legally ruin my life. My father finally spoke. His voice was low and heavy with manipulative sorrow. "Sarah, please," he said, "I am begging you. If Travis loses this project, he loses everything. If the bank proceeds with their investigation, I lose everything. We need you to save this family. You are the only one who can fix this." I sat back in my chair. The dining room felt like a surreal movie set. The roast beef on the table was growing cold. The crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. And the four people sitting around me were actively conspiring to destroy my life to preserve their own comfort. I thought about the forensic accountant's report sitting safely in my apartment. I thought about the $300,000 my father had secretly wired to the IRS to cover his tax evasion. I thought about the fact that Travis's luxury development project did not even legally exist and was nothing more than a desperate Ponzi scheme collapsing under its own weight. If I refused to sign those papers right now, they would know I was planning to fight back. Travis was desperate enough to do something reckless. My father was terrified enough to try and flee. I needed them to believe I was completely defeated. I needed them to believe they had successfully crushed my spirit, just like they had done 1,000 times before. I needed them to sleep soundly tonight, so the federal agents could build their case without interruption. I reached across the table and picked up the expensive silver pen Travis had laid out for me. Okay, I whispered, letting a single tear fall down my cheek for dramatic effect. Okay, I will do it for the family. Helen let out a loud, dramatic sob of relief. Oh, thank God, she cried, pressing her napkin to her face. I knew you would do the right thing, Sarah. I knew you loved us. Travis let out a long breath, leaning back in his chair with a triumphant smirk. See, Jessica, he said, glancing at his wife. I told you she would step up. Good girl, Sarah. You just saved the business. I pulled the sworn affidavit toward me. I uncapped the pen. I placed the tip against the thick paper. I focused every ounce of my professional accounting discipline into my hand. I signed the affidavit, but I did not write my actual legal signature. My real name is Sarah Lynn Bennett. On the legal line, I carefully and deliberately wrote Sarah Lynn Bennett. I dropped the H in my first name. I dropped the E in my middle name. I dropped the double T in my last name. Furthermore, I completely changed the angle of my cursive script, transforming my usual sharp professional loops into rounded, messy letters. To a casual observer glancing at the paper from across a dining room table, it looked like a quick, messy signature. To a bank fraud investigator, a notary auditor, or a judge in a court of law, it was an obvious, glaring invalidation. It was a legally binding document signed by a person who did not exist. I slid the affidavit aside and pulled the $200,000 bridge loan agreement in front of me. I flipped to the final page where the guarantor's signature was required. I used the exact same fabricated name, Sarah Lynn Bennett. I altered the date slightly, making the numbers illegible and overlapping. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm. I was sitting in the lion's den, surrounded by predators who thought they had just consumed their prey. They had no idea they had just swallowed poison. I put the pen down and pushed the stack of papers across the mahogany table toward Travis. There I said, my voice soft and defeated. It is done. Are we okay now? Travis eagerly grabbed the documents, quickly flipping to the signature pages to ensure the ink was there. He did not look closely at the spelling. He only cared that the lines were filled. He smiled a genuine predatory smile and tucked the papers securely into his leather briefcase. We are perfect, Sarah, he said. I will have William stamp these tonight and deliver them to the bank and the private lender first thing tomorrow morning. You have nothing to worry about. My father let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his face with his hands. Thank you, Sarah, he muttered. You did the right thing. I stood up from the table, pushing my chair back slowly. The air in the room suddenly felt suffocatingly stale. The performance was over, and I needed to leave before the sheer disgust I felt broke through my carefully constructed mask. I should get home, I said, keeping my head slightly bowed. I have an early morning at the office tomorrow. My mother stood up and walked over to me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders in another suffocating embrace. Drive safe, sweetheart, she cooed softly. We love you so much. Thank you for being such a good daughter. I did not hug her back. I let my arms hang limply at my sides until she released me. I nodded to Jessica, who was already back to scrolling on her phone, completely disinterested now that she had gotten what she wanted. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, and out the front door into the cool night air. The moment the heavy front door clicked shut behind me, my entire posture changed. I did not walk to my car with my head down. I stood up, perfectly straight. I took a deep breath of the crisp suburban air, filling my lungs with absolute freedom. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I locked the doors and started the engine. The dashboard lights illuminated the dark interior. I pulled my phone from my purse and sent a text message to David Sterling, my fraud attorney. The message was brief and completely factual. They forced the meeting. I signed the secondary loan guarantee and the bank affidavit under extreme duress. I deliberately misspelled my full legal name and altered my signature mechanics on every single page. The documents are in Travis's possession. He intends to file them tomorrow morning. David's reply came through less than a minute later. Perfect. The moment he submits those documents to the bank and the lender, he upgrades his crime from attempted fraud to aggravated federal wire fraud and identity manipulation. We have them exactly where we want them. I put my phone down and shifted the car into drive. I drove away from my parents' house, leaving them behind to celebrate their fake victory. They thought they had chained me to their sinking ship. They did not realize I had just handed them the anchor. The final trap was set, and all I had to do now was watch them drown. The morning after the dinner at my parents' house, I woke up before the sun even crested the Chicago skyline. The heavy, suffocating tension of the previous night had completely evaporated from my body. It was replaced by a sharp, chilling clarity. I sat at my small kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, staring at my laptop screen. I had successfully bought myself a window of time by signing that commercial bridge loan and the bank affidavit with a fabricated name and an altered signature. I had given Travis and my father a false sense of absolute security. They thought I had folded. They thought they had secured their stolen funds and chained me to their sinking ship. They forgot who they were dealing with. I was not just their quiet, accommodating daughter. I was a senior corporate bookkeeper. My entire professional life revolved around following the money. I knew how to find the hidden threads that tied shell companies together. I knew how to dig through public records, tax identification numbers, and state registries. People like Travis always leave a digital footprint because their arrogance makes them sloppy. They believe that because they wear expensive suits and talk loudly in boardrooms, nobody will ever bother to look under the floorboards of their business. I opened my laptop and went straight to work. I did not need illegal hacking tools. I only needed my professional expertise and access to public state databases. I started by pulling up the Secretary of State Business Registry. I typed in the name of Travis's real estate development firm, the company that was supposedly building a massive luxury condominium project in the West Loop, the company that desperately needed my $950,000 trust fund to survive a temporary cash flow bottleneck. The search results loaded on my screen. I clicked on the Articles of Organization for his primary limited liability company. The first red flag was immediate. The principal business address was not a commercial office suite. It was a virtual mailbox located inside a strip mall shipping center. I cross-referenced the business entity with the city zoning and planning department. If Travis was actually building a luxury residential complex, there would be a massive public record of building permits, environmental impact studies, and architectural zoning approvals. I searched his company name. I searched his personal name. I searched the names of his known business associates. The database returned absolutely zero results. There were no permits. There was no construction site. The luxury condo project that my family was so proudly toasting with expensive champagne did not exist. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I accessed the county court records portal and ran a civil litigation search on Travis and all of his registered business entities. This is where the polished facade of his success completely shattered. The screen filled with a long, cascading list of civil lawsuits. Over the past 4 years, Travis had been sued by dozens of private investors. The legal complaints all detailed the exact same story. Investors had given Travis massive sums of cash for commercial development projects that never broke ground. I downloaded the public court filings and began to read through the allegations. My professional training kicked in, piecing together the timeline of his financial ruin. Travis was not a real estate developer. He was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He was taking fresh capital from new investors and using it to pay off the angry, aggressive investors from his previous failed projects. He was constantly shuffling money from one shell company to another, trying to keep the entire fraudulent pyramid from collapsing. I pulled out the forensic report that Thomas the accountant had given me. I looked at the timeline of my stolen trust fund. The very morning my father wired the $950,000 into Travis's account, the money did not sit there. According to the tracking data, the funds were immediately dispersed. $300,000 went back to my father to pay off his hidden tax evasion debts with the Internal Revenue Service. The remaining $650,000 was blasted out in wire transfers to 3 different private law firms. I matched the names of those law firms against the civil litigation records on my screen. They were the exact law firms representing the defrauded investors who were actively suing Travis. My grandmother's money, the money she had painstakingly saved to protect my future, had been used to pay off out-of-court settlements and gag orders to keep Travis out of federal prison. I sat back in my chair, the cold coffee forgotten on the table. The sheer magnitude of their deception was staggering. My father had looked me dead in the eye and told me the money was being put to work to build a family legacy. Jessica had bragged about upgrading to a 7-bedroom mansion in the North Shore. It was all a complete illusion. They were absolutely bankrupt. They were drowning in debt and legal threats, and they had used my name, my credit, and my inheritance as a human shield. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated disgust. But the investigation was not over. While I was digging through the financial records, trying to map out exactly how my father had managed to hide a $300,000 tax lien from the family, I realized I needed to look at his personal financial history, because I had been the family bookkeeper for years, helping them file their annual taxes and balance their checking accounts. I still had access to a shared digital archive of their old bank statements. I had set it up for them years ago, when my father claimed he wanted to be more organized. I logged into the secure archive intending to find the origin of his federal tax debt. I began sorting through the folders, organizing the files by year. I clicked on a folder from 5 years ago. As the documents populated on my screen, a specific set of bank transfers caught my eye. 5 years ago, my mother Helen had called me in a state of absolute panic. She told me she had been diagnosed with a severe gallbladder issue that required immediate emergency surgery. She sobbed on the phone, telling me that their high-deductible health insurance would not cover the specialized procedure she needed. She said the hospital required $15,000 upfront before they would even admit her. I was 26 years old at the time. I was working a demanding corporate job, trying to build my savings and establish my independence. When my mother cried and told me she was in pain, I did not hesitate. I emptied my personal savings account. I took on a second weekend job doing basic tax preparation for local small businesses, working 70-hour weeks just to make ends meet. I transferred exactly $15,000 to my parents' joint checking account to save my mother's life. I clicked on the bank statement from that exact month 5 years ago. I found my $15,000 incoming wire transfer. I traced the money to see which hospital they had paid. The money did not go to a medical facility. It did not go to a surgeon or a specialist or a pharmacy. I stared at the screen, my vision narrowing, until the only thing I could see were the transaction descriptions. 2 days after I sent the money, there was a massive outgoing payment to an exclusive luxury travel agency in downtown Chicago. Following that were dozens of international credit card charges, a boutique hotel in Rome, a high-end leather goods store in Milan, expensive restaurants in Florence, vineyard tours in Tuscany. My breath caught in my throat, perfectly suspended in a moment of absolute devastating realization. I remembered that summer. I remembered sitting in my hot, cramped apartment, eating cheap instant noodles because I had drained my grocery budget to help my mother. I remembered how exhausted my bones felt from working 7 days a week. And I remembered that exactly 2 weeks after my mother supposedly had her emergency surgery, she and Jessica had gone on a 2-week vacation to Europe. At the time, Helen had told me that Jessica had won a sales contest at her boutique job and that the trip was fully paid for by her company. Jessica had posted endless photos on her social media accounts, posing in front of the Colosseum, holding expensive gelato, and drinking wine on sunlit terraces. Her captions had read, "Girls trip with the best mom in the world." Feeling so blessed, I pulled up my social media account and scrolled back 5 years through Jessica's photo feed. I found the pictures. I looked at the dates on the posts. I cross-referenced them with the dates on the bank statement sitting on my screen. They matched perfectly, down to the very day. My mother never had an emergency surgery. There was no medical crisis. There was no high-deductible insurance problem. She had completely fabricated a life-threatening illness explicitly to steal $15,000 from her hard-working daughter so she could take her golden child on a luxury European vacation. I stared at a photo of my mother and sister smiling brightly in front of a fountain in Rome. They looked so happy. They looked so carefree. They were standing there bathed in Italian sunlight, completely funded by the exhaustion and sacrifice of the daughter they viewed as nothing more than an ATM machine. A heavy, suffocating silence filled my apartment. For 28 years, I had blamed myself for the emotional distance in my family. I had always believed that if I just worked a little harder, if I was just a little more accommodating, if I just solved enough of their problems, they would eventually love me the way they loved Jessica. I had internalized their neglect and turned it into my own personal failing. But looking at the undeniable black and white proof on my computer screen, the final illusion of my childhood completely shattered. They did not misunderstand me. They did not accidentally take me for granted. This was a deliberate, calculated, and systematic exploitation. My mother had weaponized my love and my empathy to steal from me. My father had weaponized my trust to commit federal bank fraud. My sister had happily consumed the fruits of my labor while actively mocking my lifestyle. They had never been my family. They had been my parasites. I closed the folder containing the European vacation receipts. I did not need to see anymore. The pain in my chest that had been tight and sharp suddenly dissolved. It was replaced by a towering absolute resolve. I was no longer a victim sitting in the dark wondering why I was not good enough for my own parents. I was a corporate bookkeeper holding the exact blueprints of their total destruction. I spent the next 6 hours compiling everything into a master dossier. I printed out the public records proving Travis's real estate company was an empty shell. I printed out the civil litigation filings detailing the Ponzi scheme and the furious investors. I printed the tracking data that showed my trust fund being used to pay off out-of-court settlements. I printed the records of my father's hidden IRS tax liens. I even printed the bank statements proving my mother had committed wire fraud by faking a medical emergency to fund a luxury vacation. I organized every single document into clear chronological order. I highlighted the illegal transactions. I tabbed the forged signatures. I built a case file so incredibly dense and legally perfect that any prosecutor in the country could read it and secure a conviction within an hour. My hands did not shake once during the entire process. I felt an intense, terrifying sense of peace. For my entire life, I had been the one cleaning up their messes. I was the one who made sure the bills were paid and the ledgers were balanced. I was the one who protected them from the consequences of their own terrible decisions. I closed the heavy binder and rested my hands flat on the cover. I was officially resigning from my position as the family savior. It was time for Robert, Helen, Jessica, and Travis to finally pay their own debts. They had stolen my past, and they had attempted to steal my future, but they had handed me the exact tools I needed to ensure they would never steal from anyone ever again. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled past my parents' names. I scrolled past my sister's name. I clicked on the contact for the Federal Financial Crimes Division. I had gathered the evidence. I had built the timeline. I had secured the proof of the forged signatures, the money laundering, and the tax evasion. I took a deep, steadying breath. I pressed the call button and listened to the phone ring. I was ready to bring the entire empire of lies crashing down onto their heads. I was sitting at my small kitchen island with the master dossier of my family's crimes spread out before me. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the linoleum floor of my apartment. I had spent hours staring at the undeniable proof that my mother had faked a medical emergency to fund a European vacation for her and my sister. I had stared at the public court filings, proving that Travis was running a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. My heart was no longer racing. My hands were no longer shaking. The deep, agonizing pain of being the unloved daughter had been entirely burned away, leaving nothing but cold, hard clarity. I was a corporate bookkeeper. I dealt in facts, and the fact was, my family was a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of suburban respectability. I was just about to close the heavy binder when a sharp, rapid knocking echoed from my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the entitled, demanding rap of someone who believed the world should instantly open up for them. I quickly closed the binder and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, turning the physical key to lock it. I smoothed down my simple cotton sweater, took a deep breath to compose my features into a mask of quiet submission, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway, tapping her expensive leather heel impatiently against the floor, was my older sister, Jessica. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Jessica brushed past me without waiting for an invitation. She was wearing a pristine white silk blouse, tailored trousers, and a diamond tennis necklace that sparkled aggressively under the cheap fluorescent lights of my entryway. The air immediately filled with the scent of her custom-blended perfume. It was a suffocatingly rich floral smell that always made my apartment feel even smaller than it actually was. "Oh, Sarah," she sighed dramatically, looking around my modest living room with an expression of barely concealed pity. "It always smells like old books and cheap coffee in here. You really need to hire a decorator, or at least buy some decent candles. Travis and I are upgrading everything in the new house. I cannot even imagine living in a space this cramped anymore. I closed the door, leaning against the wood. I did not snap at her. I did not point out that the only reason she was upgrading her house was because her husband had forged my signature to steal my $950,000 trust fund. I knew exactly what role I needed to play. I needed to be the small, unremarkable sister. I needed to feed her immense vanity because vain people are inherently careless. "It is perfectly fine for me, Jessica," I said, keeping my voice soft and agreeable. "What brings you all the way into the city on a Thursday afternoon?" She turned around, a brilliant, blinding smile spreading across her perfectly manicured face. She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope. The envelope was a shimmering, pearlescent white, sealed with a custom gold wax stamp. She held it out to me like she was handing a peasant a piece of gold. "I wanted to hand-deliver this to you," she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "Travis and I are hosting a Grand Vow Renewal and Company Launch Gala next Friday night at the Drake Hotel. It is going to be the social event of the season in Chicago. We have invited 300 of the most influential people in the city. Investors, local politicians, everyone who matters. We are renewing our vows to celebrate our anniversary, and Travis is officially launching the next phase of his luxury real estate development firm." I took the heavy envelope from her outstretched hand. The cardstock was incredibly thick with raised gold lettering. The sheer irony of the situation was almost suffocating. They had stolen my entire financial future to pay off angry investors who were actively suing them for fraud. They were completely bankrupt, hiding behind a mountain of secret debt and federal tax liens. And yet here they were, throwing a massive lavish gala at one of the most expensive hotels in the city. They were spending stolen money to celebrate a business that was entirely a mirage. "You should really come, Sarah." Jessica continued, walking over to my kitchen counter and running a finger across the surface, checking for dust. "You spend way too much time hiding in this depressing little apartment, pushing numbers around for other people. You need to get out and see what real success looks like. Travis is building an empire. It would be good for you to see how high-level business actually operates. Maybe you could learn something." I looked down at the gold lettering on the invitation. A plan began to formulate in my mind, rapidly executing step by step. I needed more evidence. I had the paper trail from the forensic accountant, but I needed a verbal confirmation. I needed something that proved they knew exactly how that forged document had been created. "That sounds incredibly impressive, Jessica," I said, walking over to the kitchen counter to join her. "Let me get you a glass of water." I turned my back to her and reached for a glass from the cabinet. With my other hand, I smoothly slipped my smartphone out of my pocket. I opened the voice memo application, pressed the red record button, and set the phone face down on the granite counter right next to where Jessica was standing. I handed her the glass of water. "I am just still so shocked by everything I said." My voice trembling slightly, playing the role of the overwhelmed, naive sister perfectly. "I mean, the bank froze the money so quickly at first. I'm just surprised they let the wire transfer go through so fast after Dad gave them the paperwork. The security protocols for a trust fund that large are usually so incredibly strict. I honestly did not think a simple piece of paper would work." Jessica took a sip of her water and let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. She placed the glass down right next to my recording phone. Her eyes sparkled with arrogant superiority. She could never resist an opportunity to show off how much smarter she and her husband were than everyone else, especially me. "Oh, please, Sarah," she scoffed, waving her hand in the air. "You always think the rules are so absolute because you are a rule follower. Travis knows how the real world works. Travis said, your digital signature is incredibly easy to copy. Just a drink with the notary public, and it is done." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face entirely blank. I tilted my head slightly, feigning innocent confusion. "Really?" I asked softly. "But what about the notary stamp? The bank told me it was officially notarized. That has to be difficult to fake." Jessica rolled her eyes, letting out another condescending laugh. "It is not difficult when you have connections," she bragged, leaning against the counter. "Travis just called his cousin William. William still has his official notary seal, even though he does not practice real estate anymore. Travis said it just took a few drinks with William, and the notary public stamp was done. A couple of clicks on the computer, a stamp on the paper, and the bank accepted it without a second thought. It is all about who you know, Sarah. That is how real wealth is built. Not by sitting in a cubicle doing math all day, There it was, the absolute undeniable smoking gun. She had just verbally confessed to a federal conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. She had explicitly named her husband and his cousin as the primary actors. She had confirmed the exact method of the forgery. And my phone, sitting just inches from her hand, was recording every single crystal clear syllable. I looked down at the floor, letting my shoulders slump, portraying total defeat. "Wow," I whispered. "Travis really is something else. I guess I just do not understand how these things operate." "No, you do not," Jessica agreed, her tone laced with absolute satisfaction. She had thoroughly enjoyed putting me in my place, but that is why Dad stepped in. You would have just let that money sit in a conservative account gathering dust for the rest of your life. Travis is turning it into a legacy. You should be thanking us honestly. We are making sure your inheritance actually builds the family name. She grabbed her designer handbag from the counter and adjusted her silk blouse. "Anyway, I have a million things to do before the gala next week. I need to meet with the caterers and then go in for a dress fitting. Make sure you RSVP by Monday, Sarah. And please try to buy a dress that does not look like it came from a discount rack. There will be photographers there." "I will make sure I am dressed appropriately," I said, following her to the front door. "Thank you for bringing the invitation, Jessica. I appreciate it." She offered a brief dismissive wave over her shoulder and stepped out into the hallway. The heavy door clicked shut behind her. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of my apartment. I did not move for a full 10 seconds. I waited until I heard the distant ding of the elevator bell and the mechanical hum of the car descending to the lobby. Then I turned around and walked straight back to the kitchen counter. My hands were finally shaking, but it was not from fear or submission. It was from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I picked up my phone. The screen was still illuminated, the red recording timer ticking steadily upward. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I pressed the stop button. The file saved automatically. I immediately uploaded the audio file to my secure encrypted cloud storage. Then I emailed a copy of the file directly to David Sterling, my fraud litigation attorney. I sent a second copy to Thomas Bradley, my forensic accountant. I pressed play on my phone and held it to my ear. The audio was pristine. Jessica's arrogant, mocking voice filled the quiet room. "Travis said your digital signature is incredibly easy to copy. Just a drink with the notary public, and it is done." I listened to the recording 3 times in a row. Every time her voice echoed out of the speaker, the knot in my chest loosened a little more. They had always thought I was the weak link in the family. They thought my silence was a sign of stupidity. They thought my willingness to help them meant I lacked a spine. But they had completely misunderstood the nature of my silence. I was not quiet because I was weak. I was quiet because I was always observing. I was always keeping the receipts. I picked up the heavy gold-foiled invitation from the counter. A Grand Vow Renewal and Company Launch Gala. 300 of the most elite influential people in Chicago would be gathered in one room to celebrate a lie. My father would be there, trying to look like a successful patriarch. Travis would be there, trying to look like a visionary developer. Jessica would be there, trying to look like royalty. I looked at the invitation, and a cold, ruthless smile spread across my face. I would definitely be attending their beautiful gala, but I would not be wearing a cheap dress, and I would not be sitting quietly in the corner. I had the paper trail, I had the bank records, I had the tax liens, and now I had the verbal confession. The final piece of the puzzle was firmly in my hands. The trap was fully constructed, and the bait was set. All I had to do now was hand it over to the federal authorities and watch my family walk right into their own destruction. Monday morning arrived with a heavy downpour washing over the Chicago streets. I did not go to my logistics firm. I had already requested the week off using my accumulated vacation days. I put on my sharpest charcoal suit, pulled my hair back into a tight professional knot, and picked up the heavy leather binder containing the absolute destruction of my family. I drove downtown to the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse. The federal building was an imposing structure of glass and steel. It was the perfect place to dismantle a lie. I walked through the metal detectors with perfectly steady hands. I navigated the polished corridors until I reached the intake desk for the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division. I asked to speak with a duty agent regarding a multi-million-dollar wire fraud and a linked Ponzi scheme. As a certified public accountant carrying a meticulously organized master dossier, I did not have to wait long. Special Agent Thomas Reynolds was a man in his late 50s with sharp, observant eyes and a demeanor that completely lacked humor. He led me into a sterile grey interview room and offered me a glass of water. I declined. I placed the heavy binder directly in the center of the metal table. I told him my name and my profession. I explained that 4 days ago, my father, Robert Bennett, and my brother-in-law, Travis Hayes, had conspired to forge a legal power of attorney. I explained that they used this fabricated document to bypass banking security and initiate a fraudulent wire transfer of $950,000 across state lines. Agent Reynolds opened his notepad, but his expression remained skeptical. Family financial disputes are often messy, he stated, warning me that federal agencies do not typically act as mediators for inheritance squabbles. I completely agreed with him. I kept my voice perfectly level and professional. I told him this was not a dispute. This was a coordinated federal crime. I opened the binder to the first tab. I showed him the forged power of attorney, the digital signature metadata, and the IP address trace, proving the document was executed from Travis's commercial office building. Then I turned to the second tab. I presented the public civil litigation records detailing how Travis was running a massive real estate Ponzi scheme, actively defrauding dozens of private investors. I showed him the banking transit data, proving that my stolen trust fund was immediately dispersed to pay off those exact investors to avoid pending lawsuits. Agent Reynolds stopped writing. The skepticism completely vanished from his face. He leaned forward and began examining the documents with intense focus. I did not stop there. I opened the third tab and presented the evidence of my father's federal tax evasion. I showed the agent the hidden Internal Revenue Service tax liens and the corresponding wire transfer of $300,000 that my father had diverted from my stolen trust fund to pay his federal debts. Finally, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a secure digital drive. I placed it on top of the documents. I told Agent Reynolds that I had physical audio evidence of the conspiracy. I explained that my sister Jessica had voluntarily confessed to the mechanics of the crime in my apartment just 3 days ago. I requested permission to play the recording. Agent Reynolds nodded and brought a digital audio player into the room. We sat in absolute silence as Jessica's arrogant voice echoed off the concrete walls. Travis said your digital signature is incredibly easy to copy. Just a drink with the notary public, and it is done. When the recording ended, Agent Reynolds looked at me with a mixture of professional respect and genuine astonishment. He picked up his office phone and requested that a senior investigator from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division join us in the room immediately. The tax evasion and the money laundering required joint federal jurisdiction. I spent the next 4 hours walking the federal agents through every single line of code, every banking routing number, and every forged signature. I provided them with a flawless map of my family's criminal enterprise. By the time I left the federal building, the agents had everything they needed to begin drafting federal arrest warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. My next stop was the regional headquarters of my banking institution. I bypassed the local branch manager and secured an emergency meeting with the regional director of fraud prevention. I walked into the plush corporate boardroom and sat across from a panel of 3 senior bank executives and their corporate legal counsel. They were visibly nervous. A fraudulent wire transfer of nearly $1 million executed under their watch was a massive liability issue. They expected me to scream and threaten them with a massive civil lawsuit for their security failures. Instead, I slid a formal letter of notification across the table. I informed them that I had just spent the morning with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I provided them with the official federal case number and the contact information for Special Agent Reynolds. I explained that the individuals who forged the power of attorney were part of a larger ongoing federal criminal investigation involving a multi-million-dollar real estate Ponzi scheme. The relief in the boardroom was palpable. By providing them with a federal case number, I shifted the primary narrative from their internal banking negligence to an external, highly sophisticated federal crime. I am invoking my rights under the bank's comprehensive fraud insurance policy, I told the regional director smoothly. The funds were removed through malicious identity theft and coordinated wire fraud. The federal authorities are currently pursuing criminal indictments. I expect the entire $950,000 to be fully restored to my trust account by your insurance underwriters before the end of the fiscal quarter. The regional director immediately agreed. He assured me that with the federal case number and the metadata proof their insurance division would process the restoration claim without delay. They officially locked the account permanently, flagging Robert Bennett, Travis Hayes, and the notary William Hayes in their internal security systems. They promised full cooperation with the federal subpoena for the transaction records. I had successfully insulated my financial future and severed my family's access to my wealth forever. I left the banking headquarters feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The afternoon sun was finally breaking through the heavy Chicago clouds. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. Just as I put my key into the ignition, my cell phone began to vibrate violently in my cup holder. I looked at the screen. The caller identification displayed an unknown local number. I knew exactly who it was. The banking fraud department had likely frozen the transfer accounts and sent automated alerts to the involved parties. The dominoes were officially starting to fall. I took a deep breath. I opened my call recording software, ensuring the system was capturing the audio. Then I answered the phone, pressing it to my ear. "Hello?" I said, my voice soft and perfectly neutral. Sarah Bennett, a man's voice, barked through the speaker. It was a harsh, gravelly tone, thick with panic and poorly concealed aggression. "This is William Hayes, Travis's cousin." "Yes, William," I replied calmly. "How can I help you this afternoon?" "Do not play games with me, you stupid little accountant," he practically shouted. His breathing was heavy and ragged. "I just got a notification that the bank flagged my notary commission number for a fraudulent transaction investigation. Travis told me you went to the branch manager and started asking questions about the wire transfer. He told me you're trying to blow up his real estate deal." I stared out the windshield at the passing traffic. I did not raise my voice. I did not match his aggressive energy. "Travis is running a business, William," I said smoothly. "I am just trying to understand the paperwork involved." "You do not need to understand anything," he snapped. "You signed the consent forms last night at dinner. Travis showed them to me. You authorized the transfer. You agreed to the bridge loan. You are legally bound to this project now. If you do not call the bank right now and clear my name from this investigation, I will personally ruin your pathetic little life." I let a few seconds of heavy silence stretch over the phone line. I wanted him to feel his own panic bouncing back at him. "You're threatening me, William?" I asked softly. "I am stating a fact," he snarled. "I know you are a certified public accountant, Sarah. I know you work for a corporate logistics firm. I will call your human resources department. I will tell them you are actively trying to sabotage a legitimate commercial real estate transaction. I will file a formal complaint with the state licensing board and have your accounting credentials stripped. You will never work in finance again. You will be completely destitute." He was trying to use my professional reputation as leverage. He thought he could bully me into submission the same way my family had bullied me for decades. He thought I was easily intimidated. "That is a very bold threat, William," I said, keeping my tone incredibly polite. "But there is a slight problem with your logic." "What problem?" he spat. "The problem is that I never signed that original power of attorney." I replied clearly and deliberately. I was sitting at my desk at my corporate office when that document was electronically executed. You stamped a legal document that I never physically or digitally signed. That is a federal offense, William. I could hear him swallow hard through the speaker. The silence stretched thin and brittle. When he finally spoke, his arrogance had entirely overridden his common sense. "You cannot prove a single thing, you insignificant little brat." He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Travis and I handled the paperwork perfectly. My official notary seal is on that document. It is registered in the state database. The bank accepted it. Your signature is on the bottom line. It is your word against mine, and I am a licensed state official. Nobody is going to believe some jealous sister-in-law over a stamped legal document. You are going to call the bank and drop this investigation, or I promise you I will destroy your career." I smiled, a cold, ruthless smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "Thank you for clarifying your position, William," I said softly. "I appreciate you taking the time to confirm the details of your involvement. I really do." "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice suddenly wavering with a fresh wave of uncertainty. "What did you just say?" I said, "Have a wonderful afternoon, William," I replied. I removed the phone from my ear and pressed the red end call button. I immediately stopped the audio recording and saved the file. I uploaded the pristine audio file directly to my secure cloud storage and forwarded a copy straight to Special Agent Reynolds at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. William Hayes had just explicitly threatened a federal witness. He had attempted to extort me using my professional license as leverage. And he had openly bragged about using his official state notary seal to validate a forged document purely to protect his cousin. He had beautifully, completely, and irreversibly handed me the final nail for his own coffin. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, merging into the busy downtown traffic. The legal noose was finally tied tightly around their necks. My father, my mother, my sister Travis, and William were all standing on the trapdoor. They were completely blind to the mechanism functioning right beneath their feet. They still thought they were invincible. They still thought they were the smart ones who had successfully manipulated the invisible, unloved daughter. I turned on the radio and let a soft classical melody fill the quiet cabin of my car. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. The grand vow renewal and company lunch gala was only a few days away. I could not wait to attend. I had just disconnected the call with William Hayes, and the absolute silence in my car felt entirely different now. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of my childhood, where I was constantly waiting for the next emotional blow. It was the clear, sharp silence of a steel trap finally snapping shut. I drove back to my apartment with a sense of profound calm settling deep into my bones. Every traffic light, every passing car, every pedestrian on the Chicago streets felt hyper-real. For my entire life, I had been drifting through a narrative written by my manipulative parents. I was always the supporting character, the scapegoat, the financial safety net. But as I parked my car and walked up to my apartment, I realized I was finally holding the pen. I was the author now, and I was writing the final chapter. I walked into my kitchen and set my keys on the counter. I knew I needed to lock my family into their own false sense of absolute security. If they sense even a fraction of a hesitation from me, they might panic and attempt to wire the stolen trust funds into an offshore account before the federal agents could secure the assets. I needed them to believe that I was thoroughly defeated and eagerly submitting to their grand vision. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. It rang 3 times before she answered. She picked up with that familiar, breathless tone she always utilized when she was busy doing nothing of actual importance, but wanted the world to think she was indispensable. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am so glad you called. We are just completely overwhelmed with preparations for the gala next week. The caterers are driving me absolutely insane." I forced a bright, subservient tone into my voice, masking my disgust with practice ease. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I am just calling to let you know that I am definitely coming on Friday. I would not miss it for the world. I really want to be there to celebrate the family's success." Helen let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief that crackled through the phone speaker. "Oh, thank goodness," she replied. "Your father was so worried you were still holding a silly grudge about that bank mix-up. I told him you would eventually see the bigger picture. Travis is doing incredible things, Sarah. You're going to be so impressed by the caliber of people he has invited. We have city council members and major real estate magnates coming to our table." I let her talk. I let her brag about the exorbitant cost of the floral arrangements and the premium open bar. She told me in agonizing detail how Jessica had purchased a custom designer gown that cost more than my first vehicle. I simply agreed with everything she said, offering small noises of validation that I knew would feed her immense vanity. Vain people are inherently careless, and my mother was currently blinding herself with her own perceived brilliance. "Make sure you wear something appropriate, Sarah," she added, the familiar condescension creeping back into her tone like a slow poison. "There will be professional photographers everywhere. Try to look professional but elegant. We want the whole family to look cohesive and successful. Please do not wear one of those drab gray suits you always wear to your accounting job." I smiled into the empty room, a cold, ruthless expression that she could not see. "Do not worry, Mom," I told her softly. "I have the perfect dress. I guarantee you will never forget what I am wearing." She chuckled, completely missing the fatal double meaning of my words. "Good girl. We will see you on Friday. Be there by 7 o'clock sharp. Do not embarrass us by being late." I ended the call and placed the phone down. The bait was successfully swallowed. They were walking blindly toward the edge of a massive cliff, entirely convinced they were climbing a throne. The next morning, my phone rang with a secure, restricted federal number. It was Special Agent Thomas Reynolds from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He asked me to come down to the downtown field office for a final tactical briefing regarding the ongoing fraud investigation. When I walked into his sterile gray office, he was standing beside a large whiteboard covered in complex financial flowcharts and surveillance photographs of Travis's shell companies. He turned to me, and his usually stern face softened into a look of absolute professional respect. "We have everything we need, Ms. Bennett," he said quietly, gesturing for me to sit in the metal chair opposite his desk. "The United States Attorney has officially signed off on the federal arrest warrants for Robert Bennett and Travis Hayes." I sat down, taking a slow, deep breath as the magnitude of his words washed over me. "For wire fraud," I asked. "For wire fraud, identity theft, and federal tax evasion," Agent Reynolds confirmed, his voice carrying the heavy weight of federal authority. "The Internal Revenue Service is also issuing immediate asset seizure protocols for all of Travis's commercial holdings and your father's personal properties. Your forensic accounting work was flawless. It saved us weeks of discovery. We have an airtight case proving that your $950,000 trust fund was stolen to cover up an active real estate Ponzi scheme." He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. "We needed a specific tactical location to execute the arrest warrants," he explained. "Arresting them at their individual suburban homes gives them an opportunity to destroy digital evidence or initiate emergency wire transfers. Travis has been operating his fraudulent enterprise through highly encrypted laptops. We need to secure those devices while they are actively unlocked and running. We need to catch him in the act of soliciting funds." I looked at him, piecing the tactical strategy together. "The gala," I said. Agent Reynolds nodded firmly. "The Grand Vow Renewal and Company Launch Gala. Travis is using the event to pitch his fake development project to a room full of wealthy, unsuspecting investors. Our surveillance confirms he's bringing his entire executive team and all of their primary business computers to the hotel to process investment contracts on site. It is the perfect consolidated target. We will have every single suspect and every piece of physical evidence in one completely controlled environment. We are going to lock the building down." I felt a sudden sharp chill run down my spine. This was really happening. For 28 years, my family had operated under a cloak of absolute impunity. They had manipulated, extorted, and stolen without ever facing a single consequence. Now they were going to be dismantled by the federal government in front of 300 of the most influential people in the city. "When do you move in?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "We will have plainclothes agents stationed in the ballroom from the beginning of the event," Reynolds said. "We will move to secure the perimeter at exactly 8:30 in the evening. We want Travis to be completely comfortable. We want him to stand on that stage and make his fraudulent pitch to the crowd. The moment he does, he provides us with active real-time evidence of investor solicitation. Then we drop the hammer." He looked at me carefully, his eyes searching my face for any sign of hesitation. "You do not have to be there, Sarah. We have your recorded evidence and your sworn statements. It is going to be incredibly chaotic when the tactical teams breach the room. It will be ugly and highly public. Nobody would blame you for staying home." I met his gaze without blinking. "I have to be there," I said. "I spent my entire childhood hiding in the background while they tore my self-esteem to shreds. I spent my adult life balancing their books and paying for their mistakes. I am not hiding anymore. I need to look my father in the eye when the illusion finally shatters. I need them to know exactly why their empire is burning." Agent Reynolds nodded slowly. He understood. It was not about petty revenge. It was about profound, complete closure. "We will see you on Friday night, Miss Bennett," he said. Friday arrived with a heavy, overcast sky that perfectly matched my singular focus. I took the entire day off from my corporate logistics firm. I spent the morning methodically cleaning my apartment, organizing my files, and preparing my home for the completely new life that would begin tomorrow morning. The afternoon stretched on quietly. At 5 o'clock, I walked into my bedroom to prepare. I had purchased a dress specifically for tonight. I did not buy it from a discount rack, as Jessica had cruelly suggested. I went to a high-end boutique downtown and spent a significant portion of my own hard-earned savings. It was a tailored black silk dress, It fell perfectly to my knees with sharp, elegant lines that commanded immediate respect. It was not a dress meant for blending into the background. It was the kind of dress a woman wears when she is completely in charge of her own destiny. I slipped it on and smoothed the heavy, cool fabric down my sides. I applied my makeup with careful, deliberate precision. I pulled my hair back into a flawless, sleek style that left my face completely exposed. There was absolutely no hiding tonight. I fastened a pair of simple pearl earrings that my grandmother had given me when I graduated high school. She was the only person in my family who had ever truly loved me without conditions or expectations. She had tried to protect me with that trust fund, knowing the sheer greed of the man who raised me. Tonight, I was finally honoring her protection. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I looked at the reflection staring back at me. I tried to find the frightened 13-year-old girl who had sat on a cold porch next to two black garbage bags, waiting for an uncle she barely knew to rescue her from abandonment. I tried to find the exhausted 20-something bookkeeper who had drained her own savings account to pay for her mother's entirely fabricated medical emergency. Neither of them were there anymore. They had been completely burned away by the relentless cruelty of the people who were supposed to be my family. In their place stood a formidable, independent woman who had meticulously orchestrated the downfall of a massive criminal enterprise. I felt a deep, profound sense of peace wash over me. I was not doing this out of malice or spite. I was doing this out of pure, unfiltered justice. I was balancing the ultimate ledger. My father had chosen his greed over his daughter. My mother had chosen her vanity over her child. Jessica had chosen her arrogance over her sister. They had written their own tragic ending. I was simply the one delivering the final invoice. I picked up my small black clutch purse from the bed. Inside, I placed my driver's license, my car keys, and a small digital storage drive containing every single piece of evidence I had gathered. The forged signatures, the tax liens, the Ponzi scheme flowcharts, and the audio confessions were all safely secured in my hand. I walked out of my apartment and locked the door behind me. The hallway was perfectly quiet. I took the elevator down to the underground parking garage. The concrete walls echoed with the sharp, confident click of my heels. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I placed my hands on the leather steering wheel and took one final deep breath. The air inside the garage smelled like damp concrete and motor oil, but to me it smelled like absolute freedom. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the garage, merging onto the street and heading straight toward the glowing downtown skyline. I was ready to go to the place where it would all finally end. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a masterpiece of old-world Chicago opulence. I stood just inside the massive gilded double doors, taking in the sheer scale of the illusion my family had constructed. Crystal chandeliers the size of small vehicles hung from the intricately painted ceiling, casting a warm golden light over 300 of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city. The room smelled of expensive catered filet mignon, imported lilies, and the heavy, intoxicating scent of new money. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved seamlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays of champagne flutes. A live string quartet played a sophisticated classical arrangement in the corner, providing a perfect, elegant soundtrack to a massive criminal fraud. I smoothed my hands down the sides of my black silk dress. I felt completely calm. The terrified, compliant daughter, who used to shrink into the shadows of family gatherings, was gone. I was standing in the center of the lion's den, and I was the one holding the torch. I carried a simple black evening clutch. Inside it rested a single digital storage drive containing the absolute destruction of the Bennett and Hayes families. I moved through the crowd with quiet, deliberate steps. I did not rush. I wanted to observe them in their final moments of perceived glory. I saw my sister Jessica holding court near a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of the letters H and B for Hayes and Bennett. She was wearing a blindingly white custom gown covered in crystals, laughing loudly and tossing her head back as a group of wealthy wives complimented her diamond necklace. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom, completely unaware that her throne was built on a crumbling foundation of stolen trust funds and federal felonies. A few yards away, Travis was working the room like a seasoned politician. He was wearing a tailored tuxedo, holding a glass of bourbon and leaning in close to speak with a group of older, distinguished men. I recognized some of their faces from local business magazines. They were prominent commercial real estate investors. Travis was smiling, his teeth flashing perfectly white under the chandeliers, making wide, expansive gestures with his hands as he described his non-existent luxury condominium project in the West Loop. He was actively soliciting them, feeding them lies, pulling them into his Ponzi scheme right in front of my eyes. And then there was my father, Robert. He was standing near the grand stage at the front of the ballroom, radiating an aura of proud, patriarchal success. He was speaking with a local city councilman, clapping the man on the shoulder and nodding solemnly as if he were a titan of industry dispensing valuable wisdom. This was the man who had secretly wired $300,000 of my inheritance to the Internal Revenue Service to save himself from federal tax evasion charges. This was the man who had looked me in the eye and told me my stolen money was building a family legacy. I walked past them, blending into the sea of formal wear. My target was not the bar or the buffet line. My target was the elevated audio-visual booth located at the back of the ballroom. I approached the booth with the confident air of someone who belonged there. A young technician wearing a black polo shirt and headphones was sitting behind a massive soundboard and a laptop connected to the giant LED screen that dominated the wall behind the main stage. "Excuse me," I said, my voice projecting clear corporate authority. "I am Sarah Bennett. Robert Bennett is my father, and Travis Hayes is my brother-in-law. I am coordinating the family presentation for the vow renewal and the company launch." The technician pulled off one headphone and looked at me. "Oh, right," he said, nodding. "They told me there would be a slideshow presentation before the champagne toast." "Exactly," I said, offering him a warm professional smile. "I have the final updated file right here on this drive. We had to make a few last-minute edits to the family photo montage. I need you to plug this in and cue it up. When I step onto the stage and give you the signal, I need you to put the file on the main screen and leave it there." I handed him the digital drive. He took it without a single question, plugging it directly into his primary laptop. He clicked a few buttons and gave me a thumbs up, indicating the file was loaded and ready to project onto the massive LED wall. I thanked him and walked back into the crowd, positioning myself near the front of the stage. The trap was locked. The trigger was set. A few minutes later, the string quartet stopped playing. The low hum of 300 conversations slowly died down as the main ballroom lights dimmed. A single bright spotlight illuminated the center of the grand stage. My father walked up the carpeted stairs holding a microphone. He buttoned his suit jacket and looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites. He smiled a deep, resonant smile that reached all the way to the back of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for joining us on this magnificent evening. We are gathered here tonight for two very important reasons. We are here to celebrate love, and we are here to celebrate legacy." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The audience listened with polite, respectful attention. 40 years ago, I started my journey in the business world with nothing but a strong work ethic and a commitment to family values. Robert continued lying with the ease of a man who had practiced his entire life. "I learned very early on that true wealth is not just about capital. It is about trust. It is about the bonds we share with our loved ones and the promises we keep to our partners. Trust is the foundation of everything we build." I stood near the front row listening to his hypocritical garbage. He was giving a speech about trust and family values to a room full of people he and his son-in-law were actively trying to defraud. He was standing on a stage paid for by my stolen inheritance, lecturing the city elite about hard work. "Tonight, we are officially launching the next phase of Hayes Bennett real estate development," my father announced, his voice rising with theatrical pride. "My son-in-law Travis has taken those core family values and applied them to the modern commercial market. He is building something incredible in the West Loop, a project funded by family capital, backed by generational trust, and driven by absolute integrity." A smattering of polite applause rippled through the ballroom. Travis smiled modestly from his table, raising his glass toward my father. "But before we talk about the future of the company," Robert said, lowering his voice to a softer, more intimate register, "I want to talk about the heart of this family. Tonight, my beautiful daughter Jessica and her brilliant husband Travis are renewing their wedding vows. They are the future of this family. I would like to call them up to the stage right now to share a special presentation we have put together celebrating their journey. Travis, Jessica, please come up here." The audience began to applaud loudly. Jessica stood up, smoothing her crystal-covered gown, preparing to make her grand entrance. Travis stepped out from behind his chair, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. This was the moment, the exact fraction of a second before they claimed their false victory. I did not wait for them to reach the stairs. I moved with swift, absolute purpose. I stepped out from the shadows of the front row and walked rapidly up the side stairs of the stage. My black silk dress moved fluidly around me. The audience thought I was part of the planned presentation. They thought I was the supportive sister walking up to introduce the happy couple. Maman chère. My father turned and saw me stepping into the spotlight. His proud smile instantly faltered. A look of sheer panicked confusion washed over his face. He had not authorized this. He had explicitly told me to stay in the background. "Sarah," he hissed under his breath, pulling the microphone slightly away from his face. "What are you doing? Get down from here." I did not respond to his whisper. I walked directly up to him, reached out, and firmly took the microphone from his hand. His grip was loose due to his absolute shock, and the heavy metal cylinder slipped easily into my grasp. I turned my back to him and faced the 300 people staring up at me. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing cleanly through the massive ballroom. "I am Sarah Bennett. Robert is my father, and Travis is my brother-in-law. As the chief accountant for our family, I have been tasked with sharing the true story behind the legacy you are hearing about tonight." I looked over the crowd. I saw Travis freeze halfway up the center aisle. I saw Jessica stop dead in her tracks, her smile melting into an expression of profound horror. I looked to the back of the room and made direct eye contact with the young technician in the audio-visual booth. I gave him a single sharp nod. "If you want to understand the foundation of the Hayes Bennett real estate empire," I said, my voice perfectly steady and ruthlessly clear, "you only need to look at the screen behind me." The massive LED wall, spanning 40 feet across the back of the stage, flickered to life. The room gasped in collective shock. It was not a slideshow of happy childhood photos. It was not a romantic montage of Travis and Jessica's wedding. The screen was filled with a massive high-definition image of a federal Internal Revenue Service tax lien and collection order. The document was completely unredacted. Robert Bennett's name was printed clearly at the top. The bold red stamp across the center declared a severe federal tax delinquency spanning 3 years, revealing that my father was secretly hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to the federal government for tax evasion and fraudulent deductions. "What is this?" someone in the front row murmured loudly. The polite silence of the ballroom shattered instantly, replaced by a growing wave of frantic whispers. My father lunged toward me, his face flushed purple with absolute terror. "Turn that off," he demanded, his voice cracking as he reached for the microphone. "Turn it off right now." I stepped smoothly out of his reach. The technician, having been given his instructions, clicked to the next slide. The LED screen shifted. The IRS document vanished and was immediately replaced by a massive blown-up image of a bank wire transfer receipt. It highlighted a transfer of $950,000, originating from my personal trust account and landing directly in Travis's empty shell company account. "My father spoke to you about family capital and generational trust." I continued, my voice slicing through the rising panic in the room. "What he did not tell you is that 4 days ago, he and Travis executed a forged power of attorney to completely drain my grandmother's trust fund. They stole nearly $1 million to fund this gala and to keep themselves out of federal prison." The room erupted. The distinguished investors who had been smiling and drinking bourbon just moments ago were now standing up, pointing at the screen. The polite society rules had completely vanished. The screen clicked to the third slide. It displayed a side-by-side comparison. On the left were Travis's corporate bank statements, showing zero balances and massive overdraft fees. On the right was a long cascading list of active civil litigation lawsuits filed against Travis by dozens of private investors in the room. The lawsuits clearly outlined a massive ongoing real estate Ponzi scheme. "Travis is not a developer," I announced, projecting my voice over the growing chaos. "He does not have a luxury condominium project in the West Loop. He has a virtual mailbox in a strip mall. He took my stolen inheritance and immediately wired it to the law firms representing the people he has already defrauded. He is absolutely bankrupt, and he invited you all here tonight to solicit your money to pay for his past crimes." Travis stood frozen in the center aisle. The wealthy men he had been charming just 10 minutes prior were now backing away from him as if he were carrying a contagious disease. An older investor in the second row wearing a sharp navy suit immediately pulled his cell phone from his breast pocket and began dialing his corporate attorney. Across the ballroom, dozens of other investors followed suit. The glowing screens of mobile phones lit up the dark room like warning beacons. "This is a lie," Travis shouted, his voice echoing thinly over the crowd. He was sweating profusely, running his hands over his face in sheer panic. "She is a disgruntled sister. She is crazy. Shut the screen off." But nobody was listening to Travis. They were reading the documents displayed in glowing high definition behind me. They were looking at the routing numbers, the court case filings, the unredacted proof of total financial ruin. They were realizing that the champagne they were drinking and the filet mignon they were eating were paid for with stolen money. I looked at my mother, who was standing near her table, clutching her chest, her face completely devoid of color. I looked at Jessica, who was sobbing uncontrollably, realizing her entire life of luxury was a complete mirage. I looked at my father, who had fallen to his knees on the stage behind me, unable to process the absolute destruction of his carefully cultivated reputation. The heavy grand doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly swung open. A team of men and women wearing dark suits and serious expressions stepped into the room. They were not wealthy investors, and they were not hotel staff. They were federal agents from the white-collar crime division and the Internal Revenue Service, and they were walking directly toward the stage. I lowered the microphone. I did not need to speak anymore. The evidence had spoken for me. The polite society gala had transformed into a crime scene, and the trap I had built had closed flawlessly around them. The massive LED screen behind me cast a harsh, bright glow over the entire ballroom. The financial documents projected on the wall were undeniable. The murmurs of the 300 elite guests had escalated into a deafening roar of outrage and confusion. Men in expensive tuxedos were shouting into their cell phones. Women in designer gowns were backing away from the tables. And right in the center aisle, Travis finally snapped. His charming and polished facade shattered completely. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire universe collapse. His face turned a deep mottled purple, and the veins in his neck bulged against his tight silk collar. He let out a guttural sound that was half scream and half growl. He dropped his expensive crystal glass of bourbon right onto the polished marble floor. It shattered into 100 pieces, but the sound was completely lost in the chaos of the room. He shoved past a prominent city councilman, nearly knocking the older man over, and charged toward the stage. His heavy footsteps pounded against the carpeted stairs. I stood my ground. For 28 years, I had shrunk away from conflict. I had let this family push me into corners and silence my voice. But tonight, I was planted on that stage like an ancient oak tree. I watched him sprint toward me with his hands outstretched, his eyes wide with a manic, frantic desperation. "Give me that microphone." "You lying, ungrateful little brat," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. He lunged across the wooden platform, his expensive suit jacket flaring open. "You are ruining everything. You are destroying my company. Give it to me right now." He reached for my hand, his fingers clawing at the heavy metal microphone. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply stepped one single pace to the right, letting his own momentum carry him forward. He stumbled heavily over the microphone stand, cord nearly falling onto the polished wood of the stage. The microphone let out a sharp, piercing screech of audio feedback that echoed through the massive ballroom, forcing several guests in the front row to cover their ears. "You destroyed your own company, Travis," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the speakers before he could rip the device from my hands. "You built a house of cards out of lies and stolen money. I am just the one turning on the lights." Travis regained his balance, his breathing ragged and heavy. He raised his fist, stepping toward me with a look of pure physical violence in his eyes. He was cornered, and he was ready to strike. My father, Robert, was still on his knees on the other side of the stage, paralyzed by the overwhelming reality of his public exposure. Travis took one more threatening step toward me, but Travis would never take another step as a free man. At that exact fraction of a second, the massive gilded double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. The heavy oak doors slammed against the walls with a sound like a thunderclap, instantly silencing the 300 people in the room. Even Travis froze, his fist still suspended in the air. Every single head turned toward the back of the venue. A dozen men and women strode into the luxurious ballroom. They were not wearing tuxedos or evening gowns. They wore dark practical suits and tactical windbreakers bearing bright yellow letters on the back. FBI, IRS. The federal agents moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency. There was no hesitation in their steps. They were a force of absolute authority, sweeping into a room that had been built on a foundation of absolute fraud. Special Agent Thomas Reynolds led the formation. His face was set in a rigid expression of unyielding duty. Behind him walked the senior investigators from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The wealthy investors, socialites, and local politicians immediately parted like the Red Sea. Nobody wanted to stand in the path of a federal raid. The elite crowd pressed themselves against the walls and dining tables, leaving a wide, clear aisle running straight from the double doors to the grand stage. "Nobody move, and nobody leave this room," Agent Reynolds commanded, his voice cutting through the silent ballroom with the sharp edge of a razor. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, we are securing the premises." The sheer visual impact of the moment was something I will never forget for the rest of my life. A room that just minutes ago had been buzzing with the arrogant laughter of the untouchable upper class was now completely paralyzed by the arrival of true power. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments. The catering staff had backed away into the service corridors. The air felt charged with electricity. Agent Reynolds walked straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked entirely on the stage. 2 heavily armed agents flanked him, while 4 others immediately moved to secure the tables where Travis had set up his business laptops and investor contract portfolios. The federal government was literally seizing the crime scene in real time. Travis lowered his arm. The aggressive manic energy completely drained out of his body. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the polished wood. He looked left and then right, searching for an exit that did not exist. The ballroom was surrounded. The windows were sealed. There was nowhere left to run. My father, Robert, finally managed to stand up from the floor of the stage. He looked like an old hollow shell of a man. The patriarchal pride that had defined his entire existence had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, trembling coward. He looked at Agent Reynolds approaching the stairs, and he began to shake uncontrollably. "Robert Bennett," Agent Reynolds announced, stepping onto the stage and pulling a folded white document from his inside jacket pocket. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest, issued by the United States District Court. You are being charged with aggravated wire fraud, identity theft, interstate financial conspiracy, and multiple counts of federal tax evasion." My father opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His lips trembled wordlessly. He raised his hands in a weak defensive gesture, as if he could physically push the federal charges away. "There has to be a mistake," my father finally croaked, his voice thin and pathetic. "I am a respected man. I am a father. I did not do this. She made me do this." He actually pointed a shaking finger at me. He tried to blame me one final time. Agent Reynolds did not even glance in my direction. "Put your hands behind your back, Mr. Bennett," he ordered. 2 federal agents stepped forward. They grabbed my father's arms with rough professional force, pulling them firmly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed across the silent stage. It was the loudest sound in the world. The man who had demanded that I sign away my future to protect his reputation was now standing in a custom-tailored suit wearing federal steel bracelets. Agent Reynolds turned his attention to the other side of the stage. "Travis Hayes," he said, his voice steady and cold. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with multi-million-dollar investor fraud, interstate money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Travis did not submit quietly. The arrogant golden boy could not accept that his reign was over. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to back away from the approaching agents. "You have no proof. My company is legitimate. The property is legitimate. I am retaining legal counsel. You cannot do this to me. I know the mayor. I know the city zoning commissioner. You can call whoever you want from the federal holding facility." "Mr. Hayes," Agent Reynolds replied smoothly. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Travis tried to pull away from the agents, but they were vastly stronger and infinitely more prepared. They seized his shoulders, spun him around, and forced his arms down. He struggled, his immaculate tuxedo jacket tearing slightly at the seam, but it was completely useless. The second set of handcuffs snapped shut, locking Travis into the reality of his own actions. "Travis, my sister," Jessica screamed from the floor of the ballroom. The sound of her voice broke the stunned silence of the crowd. Jessica had been standing near the front tables watching her husband and her father be systematically dismantled by the federal government. For her entire life, she had believed that she was untouchable. She believed that because she was beautiful and cruel, the universe would always bend to her will. Now she was watching her entire source of wealth and status being hauled away in chains. She lunged forward completely hysterical. "You cannot take him," she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure agony. He did nothing wrong. Sarah is lying. Sarah is a jealous, crazy liar. Jessica took 3 rapid steps toward the stage, but she was completely blinded by her own panicked tears. She did not see the heavy wooden dining chair positioned directly in her path. The hem of her custom thousands of dollars white crystal evening gown caught violently on the carved leg of the chair. As she lunged forward, the thick fabric snagged and tore. She lost her balance entirely. She tripped, falling hard onto the carpeted floor. She landed on her hands and knees, her perfect hair falling into her face, her expensive jewelry clattering against the ground. She looked up, expecting someone to help her. She expected the wealthy wives she had been bragging to just moments ago to rush forward and offer assistance. But nobody moved. The elite socialites and prominent investors simply stared down at her with cold, brutal indifference. They were actively distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Bennett and Hayes families. They looked at her not with sympathy, but with utter disdain. She was no longer the queen of the ballroom. She was the wife of a federal criminal bleeding on the floor of a ruined gala. And then there was my mother, Helen. Helen had been standing near the ice sculpture, watching the entire scene unfold with wide, terrified eyes. She had heard the charges of tax evasion. She had heard the charges of wire fraud. She had watched her husband, the man she had conspired with for decades, be handcuffed in front of the entire city. She had watched her precious golden daughter fall to the floor in disgrace. The realization that her perfect suburban life was entirely destroyed finally hit her. The reality that the stolen $15,000 she had used for a European vacation was now in the hands of the Internal Revenue Service finally registered in her brain. Helen let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Her hands flew to her chest. She stumbled backward, her knees buckling beneath her. With a dramatic, fluttering sigh, she collapsed, entirely fainting dead away onto the floor beside the dessert table. For 28 years, my mother had used fainting spells and dramatic tears to force me to run to her rescue. Whenever she felt cornered, she would collapse, and I would be the dutiful daughter picking her up and comforting her. I stood on the stage and looked down at her unconscious body. I did not move a single muscle. I looked around the room. Not a single guest rushed to her side. The waiters did not run to bring her water. The investors did not offer to help her up. They just stared. My family had spent their entire lives treating people like disposable tools, and now in their moment of absolute ruin, they were discovering exactly how the world treats parasites. They were completely and utterly alone. Agent Reynolds began reading the Miranda rights to my father and Travis. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited, his voice calm and authoritative. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." My father stared at the floor, his shoulders trembling. Travis was breathing heavily, his face red with impotent rage. The federal agents began to guide them toward the stairs, leading them down off the stage and into the waiting custody of the transport vehicles outside. I realized my part in this performance was finally over. I had delivered the truth. I had executed the trap. I had reclaimed my life. I turned away from the massive LED screen, still displaying the irrefutable evidence of their crimes. I placed the microphone gently down onto a small wooden podium. I smoothed the front of my elegant black silk dress, ensuring not a single wrinkle marred the fabric. I held my head high, my posture perfectly straight, and then walked down the opposite side of the stage stairs. As I reached the floor of the ballroom, the crowd automatically parted from me. They did not look at me with pity or disdain. They looked at me with a quiet, fearful respect. I walked past the table where my mother lay fainted on the floor. I walked past my sister, who was still sobbing into her ruined white dress. I did not stop. I reached the edge of the room, where a silver tray of abandoned champagne flutes sat on a high-top table. I calmly picked up a crystal glass. The champagne was perfectly chilled. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp bubbles wash over my tongue. It tasted like absolute victory. I continued walking toward the grand double doors, following the path the federal agents were taking with their prisoners. As I reached the exit, I found myself walking directly parallel to my father. He was flanked by two tall FBI agents, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. He looked up at me as I approached. His eyes were wide and filled with a desperate, pleading sorrow. He looked like he wanted to ask for forgiveness. He looked like he wanted me to save him one last time. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, holding my champagne glass and looking directly into the eyes of the man who had tried to sacrifice my future for his own comfort. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt entirely, completely free. I tilted my head slightly, offering him a small, polite smile. Family first, right, Dad? I said, my voice soft but carrying perfectly through the tense air of the lobby. I did not wait for his answer. I turned around and walked out through the heavy glass doors of the Drake Hotel and out into the cool, rainy night. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles illuminated the wet pavement. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. I drove away from the wreckage of the Bennett family, leaving them to drown in the consequences of their own actions. I had a brand new life to live, and I was finally the one writing the story. The days immediately following the Grand Gala were surreal. For my entire life, I had been conditioned to believe that the world revolved around the comfort and reputation of Robert and Helen Bennett. I had been taught that their status was the most important thing in the universe, and that my only purpose was to quietly support their delusions of grandeur. But as I sat in the quiet safety of my apartment drinking my morning coffee, I read the front page of the local newspaper. The headline detailed a massive federal raid at a luxury downtown hotel. It described a multi-million-dollar real estate scam and the dramatic arrest of two prominent local businessmen. My father and my brother-in-law were no longer untouchable socialites. They were federal inmates. The federal justice system moves slowly, but when it has a perfectly organized master dossier of evidence, it moves with terrifying absolute certainty. Special Agent Thomas Reynolds called me regularly to provide updates on the case. He told me that Travis had immediately tried to throw my father under the bus, claiming that Robert was the mastermind behind the forged bank documents. My father, in turn, tried to blame everything on Travis, insisting that he was just a confused older man trying to help his daughter's husband. But there was no honor among thieves. Their united front dissolved the moment they were placed in separate interrogation rooms. The final blow to their defense came from William Hayes. The corrupt notary public realized he was facing decades behind bars for validating the forged signature. He chose self-preservation. William accepted a plea deal and agreed to testify against his own cousin and my father. He confessed to everything. He admitted that Travis bought him expensive drinks and explicitly paid him to stamp a fraudulent document. He admitted that my father was sitting right next to them when it happened. The federal prosecutors did not offer my father or Travis any leniency. The trial was swift and completely devastating. I sat in the back row of the courtroom on the day of their sentencing. I wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress. I did not hide my face. I wanted them to see me. When the judge read the verdict, his voice echoed with absolute authority. He called their actions a calculated and predatory abuse of trust. He sentenced both Robert Bennett and Travis Hayes to serve 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. They were denied the option of early parole. I watched the bailiffs place heavy metal chains around my father's waist and wrists. He looked back at me one final time before he was led through the heavy wooden doors. There was no defiance left in his eyes. There was only the hollow, terrified realization that he was going to spend his golden years locked inside a concrete cell. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I simply watched him disappear, and I felt the last invisible chain holding me to my childhood completely shatter. While the federal government was dismantling their freedom, the bank was busy repairing my future. The regional director of fraud prevention had kept his promise. Because I had provided them with undeniable proof of a coordinated federal wire fraud, the bank's comprehensive insurance policy was immediately activated. It took less than 3 weeks for the full $950,000 to be completely restored to my primary trust account. I remember opening my banking application on my phone and seeing those numbers sitting safely in my balance. My grandmother had worked her entire life to build that safety net for me. She had seen the truth about my parents long before I ever had the courage to admit it to myself. She knew I would need protection. When I saw that the money was safe, I finally allowed myself to cry. They were not tears of pain or manipulation. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. The legacy my grandmother intended for me was finally secure, and nobody would ever be able to touch it again. With my financial future guaranteed, I watched the inevitable collapse of the empire my family had built on lies. The Internal Revenue Service moves with absolute efficiency when it comes to collecting unpaid taxes. Because my father had hidden hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax evasion penalties, the federal government initiated immediate asset seizure protocols. They placed heavy padlocks on the front doors of his pristine suburban home. The white colonial house with the perfect lawn and the beautiful shutters was officially foreclosed and auctioned off to the highest bidder. My mother, Helen, the woman who had faked a severe medical emergency to steal my hard-earned savings to fund a European vacation, was suddenly homeless. She had spent her entire life judging people who did not have designer handbags or luxury cars. She had looked down her nose at my modest apartment and my simple clothes. Now she was forced to pack whatever belongings the government did not seize into cardboard boxes. She tried to call me, of course. She left dozens of desperate, sobbing voicemails begging me to use my restored trust fund to buy her a new house. She cried about how she was my mother and how family must stick together during hard times. I deleted every single message without listening past the first 5 seconds. She had made her choices, and now she had to live in the reality she had created. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she eventually moved into a tiny, damp basement apartment on the outskirts of the city, living entirely on a meager fixed income. The absolute ultimate poetic justice for a woman whose only true religion was appearances. But the most severe downfall belonged to my sister Jessica. For her entire life, Jessica had been the golden child. She had been pampered, spoiled, and protected from every single consequence. She had married a man purely because he promised her an endless stream of wealth and status. She had laughed in my face and bragged about upgrading to a 7-bedroom mansion while wearing diamonds bought with stolen cash. But when Travis went to federal prison, he left her with a mountain of absolute financial ruin. The victims of his massive real estate Ponzi scheme were ruthless. The private investors filed massive civil lawsuits against Travis and all of his associated assets. Because Jessica was legally married to him and had her name attached to several of his shell companies, the courts held her financially liable for the restitution. Every single designer dress, every piece of expensive jewelry, and every luxury vehicle she owned was seized and liquidated to pay back the people her husband had defrauded. Jessica was left with absolutely nothing. She had no college degree. She had no professional skills. She had never worked a hard day in her entire privileged life. Faced with a mountain of civil debt that would follow her for decades, she was forced to enter the real world. A former co-worker of mine told me they saw Jessica a few weeks ago, the woman who used to drink expensive champagne at charity galas and mock my corporate accounting job is now working as a cashier at a discount grocery store. She stands on her feet for 8 hours a day, scanning barcodes and bagging produce just to make the minimum payments on her massive court-ordered restitution. She has to wear a terrible polyester uniform and smile at customers who do not care about her past life of luxury. I often think about her standing behind that cash register, and I realize that the universe has a brilliant way of restoring balance. She finally has to earn her own money, and she will never again be able to look down on people who work for a living. These past few months have completely changed my perspective on life. When you grow up in a toxic household, you are constantly told that family is the most important thing in the world. You are conditioned to believe that you must sacrifice your own happiness, your own financial security, and your own mental health to protect the people who share your blood. Society reinforces this idea constantly. We are told to forgive and forget. We are told to be the bigger person. But I learned a very hard, very painful lesson. The greatest enemy you will ever face is not always a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes the greatest enemy is the person sitting across from you at the dinner table. It is the person who uses the guise of family loyalty to exploit your kindness and drain your resources. It is the parent who views you as a financial safety net rather than a human being. It is the sister who smiles to your face while helping her husband steal your inheritance. For 28 years, I was a prisoner in my own life. I walked on eggshells. I kept my voice low. I absorbed their insults and their financial demands because I thought that was what love required. But love is not exploitation. Love is not forcing your daughter to sign a fraudulent loan guarantee to cover up your own federal crimes. Love is not faking a medical emergency to go on a vacation while your child works 70 hours a week to pay your bills. When I finally found the courage to stand up and expose their lies, I did not just save my bank account. I completely liberated my soul. Today, I live in a beautiful new home that I purchased entirely on my own. I have a wonderful career. I have peace. When I wake up in the morning, I do not have a pit of anxiety in my stomach wondering what new crisis my father has created. I do not have to brace myself for my mother's manipulative tears. I am surrounded by friends who actually value my presence and respect my boundaries. I finally understand that family is a choice. You are absolutely allowed to walk away from people who hurt you regardless of what the birth certificates say. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to choose yourself. Cutting ties with my toxic parents and my sister was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was also the most important thing I have ever done. It was not an act of revenge. It was an act of profound self-preservation. I burned their empire of lies to the ground so that I could finally build a life of truth for myself. If you are listening to this right now and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep toxic family members warm. You have the right to establish ironclad boundaries, and you have the right to enforce them. You do not owe anyone your future simply because they share your genetics. Your life belongs to you. Like and subscribe to the channel. If you have ever had to cut ties with a toxic family, please leave a comment, letting me know which state you are watching from and at what time. You are not alone. See you soon.